Good evening. Welcome to the council meeting. The city attorney has informed me that I cannot charge those of you sitting in the back row a fee. I was looking for another income stream for the city. The front rows were going to be free and we're going to charge for the back, but he says, unfortunately, we can't do that. So we will continue to look for other ways to raise funds. Could we have the roll call, please?
Council Agency Member Martner.
Present.
Costa.
Present.
Starbuck.
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Vice Chair Lingle.
Here.
Mayor Chair Lynn.
Here. And for our invocation, Bert Langdon. Bert, would you rise, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. God of all the universe, we come to you tonight with humble hearts and asking you to guide this meeting, guide our council as they consider all things that are before them. We pray your blessings upon all of the employees of our city who serve us day by day. And Father, we continue to pray for our county, our state, our nation, in fact, all of our world, as we see the numerous battles that are going on. Help us to be respectful for one another and courteous and considerate, especially as we come to this meeting tonight and as we express our concerns. Let us keep in mind that we're all human beings that you love. And so, Father, especially do we pray for those who are caught up in the storm that involves at least 33 of our states in freezing and cold. And we thank you for the warmth we feel here in our own community. And so now, as we conclude this invocation, we just thank and praise you and say, Amen.
Join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
No, that one right there, right? First, I'd like to report that as your mayor, last Friday, I delivered a proclamation to Denny Anderson, our longtime chamber executive, on his retirement. The upstairs of the chamber was standing room only for Denny, and he received our proclamation and a number of others, and we certainly wish him well in his future retirement. Don't worry, he's not leaving town. He's already volunteered for 3 or 4 more things now that he has free time, so he'll still be with us. Do we have some folks here for the Teen Dating, Violence Awareness and Prevention Month? Come on up. I have to stoop down just a little. Whereas this is a proclamation on behalf of the City of Lompoc for Teen Dating, Violence and Awareness and Prevention Month. Whereas the youth of Santa Barbara County are Lompoc's most precious resource and greatest hope for the future. and ensuring their safety, well-being, positive development, and growth into healthy citizens is a priority and a responsibility that we all share. And whereas nationwide surveys conducted in 2006 and 2007 examined teen dating relationships and experiences, and the findings show that a high incidence of violence and abuse occurs among teens, including verbal, emotional, sexual, and physical violence. And whereas nationwide 1 in 5 teens who have been in a serious relationship report being hit, slapped, pushed by a partner, and in Santa Barbara County 1 in 3 teens surveyed reported having experienced an abusive relationship. And whereas teen dating violence is a reality for many teenagers and an issue that many parents are unaware of, and whereas violent relationships in adolescence can have serious ramifications for victims who are at a high risk of alcohol or drug abuse, eating disorders, risky sexual behaviors, suicide, and adult re-victimization, and whereas the Lompoc Police Department, Domestic Violence Solutions, and the Vandenberg Air Force Base Family Advocacy Program provide educational opportunities for teens and parents to learn more about the importance of healthy teen relationships and preventing teen dating violence. Now, therefore, I, John H. Lynn, Mayor of the City of Lompoc, do hereby proclaim the month of February 2011 to be Teen Dating Violence Awareness and Prevention Month. Would you like to say a few words?
Thank you, sir, for signing this proclamation for the city. My name is Pauline Chui. I'm with Family Advocacy at Vandenberg Air Force Base. And as he mentioned, we surveyed teens in Santa Barbara County and found that 1 in 3 have reported having experienced violence in their dating relationships. And this leads to depression, this leads to teen pregnancy, it leads to high school dropouts, it leads to them also continuing the cycle of violence as they get older. It's a serious issue that I think we should all address now. It's similar to regular domestic violence, but some differences is that these teens sometimes are experiencing their first relationship and they need guidance. They learn about healthy relationships or relationships from their friends, and sometimes that's not the best place to learn because they also are experiencing violence with their relationships. So it's our responsibility as parents, as teachers, as educators in the community to raise the awareness and guide our youth to have healthy relationships. Domestic Violence Solutions with Lompoc Police Department and the Family Advocacy Program at Vandenberg Air Force Base, we're all joining together to bring activities throughout the month of February. So I urge you to look for what's going to be going on in February and join us in supporting this worthy cause. Thank you.
You know, just as a youth leader, I would say to all of you, we're all out in the community and we see things. And many times people are involved in these situations and they don't know where to go or what to do. And we have help at our police department. We have help at Domestic Violence Solutions. We have help on Vandenberg Air Force Base. When you see something you know isn't right, say something. Get someone help. Point them in that direction. Okay. Do we have someone here this evening from Cabrillo? There we are. Hi, guys. Scam Alert, Prevent Loan Modification Fraud Month. Whereas a diverse and balanced homeownership preservation effort is needed to assist homeowners who are experiencing mortgage-related distress, and whereas the City of Lompoc recognizes the need to promote and facilitate homeownership preservation efforts by a dedicated group of nonprofit organizations, and whereas loan modification services have proliferated within our community and throughout the county and the state of California, and whereas some distressed homeowners seeking mortgage modifications are victimized by dishonest for-profit operators of loan modification mills, and whereas free and honest loan modification resources are available through HUS certified counselors trained by Neighborhood Works America, such as our friends at Cabrillo Economic Development Corporation, and whereas the Scam Alert campaign is seeking to prevent dishonest operators of for-profit enterprises who advertise offers of guaranteed loan modifications for a fee and fail to produce on that promise, thereby dishonestly obtaining money from distressed homeowners. And now I, therefore, John H. Lynn, Mayor of the City of Lompoc, do hereby proclaim February 2011 as Scam Alert Prevent Loan Modification Fraud Month in the City of Lompoc, and encourage citizens to report loan fraud activity by contacting the office of the Santa Barbara County District Attorney. And I want to thank you personally for the effort that you all do to help our citizens. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Gabriela Castellanos. I'm here on behalf of Berta Garcia, our Executive Director. I'm from Cabrillo Economic Development Corporation in Santa Maria. And I wanted to thank the Mayor of Lompoc and the City Council for giving such caring concern about the community, about all the scam awareness and fraud that's going on, and not just in our area, but nationwide, obviously. And just as he mentioned, it's a campaign that is happening nationwide to educate the communities as far as persons who are ready and willing to take advantage, any families who are working so hard to keep their homes but just fall prey as victims to these people who are there to take advantage of any unfortunate circumstance. So I wanted to thank also David Cryer from the CAC and United Way for the collaboration in working with them. It's been great, and we will continue working for educating the community and helping them in any way possible to be good homeowners and responsible homeowners.
My name is David Cryer, and I work for the Community Action Commission of Santa Barbara County. We thank you very much for this resolution. We also thank you for the ability to put flyers in the utility bills. That's also done in Santa Maria. We're on community television with some stories, videos, and we're going to be on Telemundo and Univision pretty soon, Lisa Radio as well, putting the word out that it's not a good idea to pay up front for foreclosure help, and that there are many better ways of doing it, and one of them is right here. Thank you very much.
And again, if you know someone in the community that needs help, you can contact the planning department here at the city, and they have the number available to contact these folks and get that assistance. So don't be bashful. Help your neighbors and friends. City Administrator's Report.
Mr. Mayor, Council, audience, and viewers, I would take this opportunity to announce 2 upcoming Council workshop dates scheduled for February. The first is Council's initial budget goal-setting workshop, scheduled for February 10th, commencing at 9 a.m. in the Council chambers. And second, continued Council workshop to discuss Council's priorities, scheduled for February 22nd, commencing at 6 p.m., also in the Council chambers. I would also like to take this opportunity to bring to your attention 3 items agendized on tonight's consent calendar. In light of what we know at this time regarding the state budget, the Governor has proposed to mitigate the $25 billion state budget deficit through several methods. Methods impacting local government, such as eliminating the redevelopment agency programs for future and existing funds not currently obligated to bonded projects, And additionally, the governor's proposal includes eliminating funds for state public library funding and library literacy programs, as well as realigning several funding allocations from the state to local levels. And with the recent voter passage of Proposition 22 to protect local funds and provide state from balancing their budget on the backs of local government, the League of California Cities is taking an active role to form a coalition opposing the governor's recent budget proposals. And Council has thus been asked to support the League's efforts to protect the millions of dollars cities stand to lose. So in response to the League's efforts, there are two related business items on tonight's consent calendar agenda for Council's approval, and that's items 7 and 8, opposition to defunding the Public Library Fund, Library Literacy Services, and the California Library Services Act, and opposition to the governor's proposal to eliminate redevelopment agencies statewide, respectively. Consent calendar item 7 requests Council authorize the mayor to sign a letter addressed to the state Senate and subcommittees on education and finance. And consent calendar item 8 recommends Council adopt a city resolution and authorize the mayor on behalf of the Council to sign the coalition sign-up form and endorse the League of California Cities letter to Governor Brown and the legislature opposing the elimination of redevelopment agencies. I'd also like to note that with Council's adoption of tonight's consent calendar, Council will approve item 10 on the consent calendar, Lompoc Police Department Special Olympics Car Show and Cruise Night, recommending Council adopt a city resolution designating the Lompoc Police Department Cruise Night on Friday, August 12th, 2011 from 5 to 7 p.m., and the Lompoc Police Department Car Show on Saturday, August 13th, 2011 in Ryan Park as city-sponsored events. Over the years, the Lompoc City Council has adopted city resolutions making Lompoc Police Department Car Show and Cruise Night a city event. And the reasoning behind the action is the Car Show is sponsored by the police department to benefit Special Olympics, and over the course of the last 9 years, the police department staff has successfully raised over $208,000 for Northern Santa Barbara County Special Olympics. And these two charitable events are always well attended and enjoyed by our community. And that is all I have tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any staff requests or announcements other than those? No? Okay. Council Redevelopment Agency requests and announcements. Councilmember Starbuck?
Yeah, I have a council request. On the 7 December meeting, this council voted to go ahead and approve the $1.7 million pool dehumidification project. It was scheduled to have a mid-January start, so it would complete by the end of May, 135 days. Reason for the emphasis on getting this project started, as I understood it, was so that this dehumidifier would be installed by the June, July, summer type months. As of today, this project has not started. I thought it was so important then. I would like to go ahead and put this on as a construction status report for a monthly update, just so that we know what's going on with the dehumidification project, because as of now, we're 14 days behind.
Councilmember Starbuck, could that be combined with the community center construction report?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And I'll second that.
And I'll third it. Do we have a fourth and a fifth? Okay. Next. Councilmember Lingle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, I'd like to express our sympathy to the city of Buellton and the family of council member and former Mayor Russ Hicks. As many of you most undoubtedly know, Mr. Hicks died this past year, or past week. Mr. Hicks was a longtime council member and I believe a 6-time mayor of Buellton, very active in the community, and he will be missed by not only the city of Buellton, but all of North and Santa Barbara County. So our condolences go out to the city of Buellton and the family of Mr. Hicks. Next, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to report that over the past week or 2 weeks, on Wednesday, January 19th, I was at a meeting here in City Hall that involved new market tax credits. On Thursday, the 20th, I was in Santa Maria for a meeting of Santa Barbara County agency governments. On January 26th and 27th, I was in Sacramento for a Northern California Power Agency, NCPA meeting. And on Friday, the 29th, I attended the Chamber of Commerce retirement for CEO Denny Anderson. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Martner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to report that I also went to the NCPA meeting on January 26 and 27.
Councilmember Costa.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If you could please all be patient. My voice is going out this evening, so I'm hoping it stays till the end, but we'll see. These past 2 weeks, I attended the Zodovich Winery grand opening in the Lompoc Wine Ghetto, which was a wonderful event attended by many community members. It's one of the current 12 local tasting rooms in the wine ghetto. They served 5 different wines and paired it with some wonderful foods as well, so that was a great time. I was also a judge for the Student Speakers Contest for the Vandenberg Village Lions Club. A young woman from Cabrillo High School, Vaidi Buch, won this contest, and she'll move on to compete at the regional level in March. The runner-up was also a young woman from Cabrillo named Jessica Rudheisen. Thank you.
Thank you. With regard to Russ Hicks' funeral, it will be February 12th at 11 o'clock at the Sandy Inez Stadium, if any of you wish to attend. I'm teaching a series of classes to a bunch of Boy Scouts, and Mayor Pro Tem Lingle has volunteered to represent the city at that activity. I have 2 council requests. The first one is a letter I think we all received from LVCHO, the Lompoc Valley Community Healthcare Organization, regarding the opportunity for approximately $150,000 in grant funding to study our bicycle and walking path safety within the city and develop a long-range plan. They came by today to present this to me, and I suggested that they deliver a letter to each council member because the time is fairly short on this. The beauty of this grant is that they're going to do all the work and they're going to pay the matching amount, and they simply need us to be the host agency for it. As they were explaining it to me, because we're a working class community, that goes in on our favor of getting the grant, and because we have a revenue stream from the Measure AD funds to actually do something once the needs are identified, that would also make us put us at the head of the class for these grants. So I would like to request a brief staff report on the feasibility of proceeding with this, and appreciate the second and the third.
I second.
No, third.
Okay, thank you very much. And away it goes. Next, in completing one of the responsibilities that I have from our December 14th workshop, I have the third draft of the graffiti abatement program, and this has been circulated through a number of people to add ideas into it and expand it from the original discussion that I had in December. And I would like to have this agendized for the next regular council meeting, not the budget meeting, so that we can discuss this and move forward with this important effort. And I'm looking for a second and a third for that.
Mr. Mayor, I'll second.
Okey-doke.
I'll third.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Okay, we have, I have a number of things to report on. I represented the city at the Vandenberg Air Force Base Quarterly Awards. I was pleased to sit next to Colonel Gould and his wife, who have just moved here to Vandenberg from Germany, and they said they had been out in town. They'd been to the restaurants. They were impressed how friendly everyone was, and they were having a great time here. This last 2 Sundays, I had a couple of sit-downs with the folks at Riverview Christian Church on one Sunday and the True Vine Bible Fellowship on the next one, and they were rocking and rolling, and we had a good time in a spirited discussion of where our city's going and what we're doing. I'm happy to report that everybody said nice things about us, so that's a good thing. And then I represented the city at the first annual Peace Awards, and Councilmember Martner was there. That was truly amazing and an outstanding effort. I've been in discussions several times with the State Parks Department regarding the situation at La Purísima Mission and keeping track on that so that I can bring a report back to the council when something comes down from the state. As of today, about noon, there was no information. And I also attended the Village Rotary and gave a little speech on our behalf. And then, the most fun thing of all, we went to the Solid Waste Task Force quarterly meeting. Now, you would think that might not be too exciting, but I want to tell you that the city of Santa Maria is working on a new landfill in Las Flores Canyon, which the total property is 1,700 acres. The landfill portion is about 300, and the rest of it's going to be a park to go along with the landfill. And they estimate that at current consumption, it will be about a 90-year fill, and then they'll move over to the next canyon. But more interestingly, and I think the staff's going to bring it back to us, there's a group called the California Product Stewardship Council. It's a nonprofit industry group that's working on a process of reducing the waste stream by better packaging at the front end and causing the manufacturers to be responsible for disposing of the packaging at the back end, particularly with regard to batteries and things like that. And the last thing is we received a letter from American Medical Response, and they wanted to commend the actions of our police officers and our fire folks in the recent trailer fire, and thanked us for stepping up and helping them save lives. And this was an outstanding effort on the part of all of our emergency service providers and acknowledged by AMR. And then finally, this is what you guys paid for. Councilmember Costa and Starbuck and I went to the California League of Cities and spent 2.5 days becoming much smarter. And now we have to take all of this and sort out the things that are good for Lompoc. And the one thing I want to say is, thank God we're in Lompoc. Because after listening to people from other cities, life is good in Lompoc. So if you think life isn't as good here as it could be a lot worse. And that's my report. And did you two want to say something about the League of Cities? Are you good with it?
I didn't want to speak so much about the League of Cities, but I wanted to kind of thank the Lompoc Police Department for a very successful graffiti abatement program on their own here in the last couple of months. It's done a lot. Thank you, Chief Dabney, and please pass to your officers that they've done very well on getting our taggers.
I'll just say a quick comment about Sacramento, which it was a wonderful experience and definitely a lot of knowledge passed down to us. It was great networking with other cities. You know, we always talk about not having to reinvent the wheel, and that's sort of the fun part when you meet representatives from other cities, because they have really great ideas that then you can feed off of and talk to one another about. So that was a wonderful experience. It was also great because they provide a lot of resources that now I can go back to and use for my basis of information when making my decisions or when I have questions in general, so I don't always have to bug Laurel. So it was great.
Anyone else? Okay. Oral communications. Who would like to come and speak to us on any subject here this evening?
Al Clark with the Library Board of Trustees. Last October, the Library Director, Molly Gerald, and I gave a presentation to Council, an update of the status of Charlotte's Web. Following our presentation, Council, by unanimous vote, directed staff, and I quote, to prepare and provide a report on all funding available that can be used to aid the proposed project. 4 months later, the Library Board of Trustees is still awaiting the presentation of that report so we can determine the viability of the project and plan the next course of action. We believe that Charlotte's Web will be a valuable asset to the economic development of our community by virtue of the enhancement to our quality of life it will provide. The project has been shovel-ready for about a month now. Plan check is complete, and the building permit has been pulled. All that is needed is the funding. We ask that the staff report be presented as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Next.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. Ralph Harmon here tonight representing the Lompoc Firefighters Foundation, and I want to invite all of you and the public at large. Our Fire and Ice Ball is coming up very quickly on February the 26th. The tickets are available now at Fire Station 1, Sunset Auto, from myself and the other people that are on the listed on the poster, which is now posted out in the lobby. And we'd like all of you to come and have a good time. We're going to have a good meal. We got many, many things already that have been donated for the auction, and hope we'll have some more donations coming in. So I just want everybody to see the posters around town, come see us, and have a good time and raise money. Thank you. 26th.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to speak?
Dulcie San, city resident, mayor and council members, and public who are watching. I'm here to reinforce an invitation that has been sent to the city administrator and to the mayor. The invitation is being extended to all the council members and the members of our RDA agency, as well as city and RDA staff and all stakeholders in the community that may be interested in what is going on with Lompoc Housing Community Development Corporation. There's a meeting that has been called by the new the county CEO person, Chandra Waller. She has called a meeting, and this meeting will be facilitated by Sue Block, who is an attorney coming from the Bay Area. It'll also have a representative, Wayne Itoga, who is with the Los Angeles HUD regional office, and also county housing and community development staff have been invited to this meeting as well. This is an informational meeting that is being called to discuss the issues and workability solutions to the financial and organizational difficulties that have been faced by our local community development corporation here. It's going to be scheduled for February the 11th, which is a Friday afternoon from 1 to 3. Right now, it's been scheduled for Santa Barbara County, the Santa Barbara County office for the supervisor's conference room. However, I have been speaking with people in the community, and there seems to be some issue about driving to Santa Barbara on a Friday afternoon. I was kind of looking forward to it, but we will be in touch with Ms. Waller asking, and we're hoping for a positive way of moving it to the Lompoc area so that more stakeholders in this area would be able to get to that meeting, and we'll be able to let you know about that very, very soon. So the invitation is to an all-hands meeting on LHCDC, called for by the county's new CEO, facilitated by an attorney who has an expertise in redevelopment and HUD organizational funding, as well as other county organizations that are concerned and are interested in working on these issues. So I hope to see representatives from the city there. I know that, as I said, the public's invited, so if anybody's watching this and would like to find out more information or just get an email on this, they're more than welcome to just contact me, Dulcie Sin, real easy to get in touch with me. And I'll be glad to share what information that I have, and I'm looking forward to a lot of different ideas and people participating and getting the information that we need. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak? Seeing no one rise, we'll close oral communication. City Clerk, do we have any written communications? Okay. Those of you in the audience who are just dying for this last 2 minutes to share oral communications with us. Seeing no one rise, we'll close that. Ah, wait. Okay. All right. Yeah. We're going to help you out here, okay? This is the only time in your life you get to stand on the furniture. Jump right up.
Do we have our safety officer here?
Yes. Safety officer is standing right behind her.
My name is Bianca Gonzalez, and I want to read my letter. Dear John and the council members, I want to write a couple of things so we could change Lompoc. First, build more stores. Next, don't build homes in animals' habitats. Then have people buy cans and have a food pantry. Also, we give it to people that can't afford food. Secondly, be green and recycle. Lastly, have everyone be thoughtful to each other. To conclude, I think if this happened, I would be happy.
Thank you, sweetheart. Thank you very much. Anyone top that? Okay, seeing no one rise, we'll close our last oral communications. We have Council Development Agency requests, comments, and meeting reports. Council member, who got here first? Councilmember Costa.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I believe Councilmember Lingle and I are actually going to request the same thing, possibly. I would like to agendize an update on the report reviewing the available funding for the Charlotte's Web Children's Library.
Yes, it has been requested, but it has not been delivered, so.
Yes, I mean, we have a standing request already, and we are 4 months into the request, and I really think it needs to be
agendized.
Yes.
Well, no, I think the staff has to do their job and actually deliver the report. It has been agendized already.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think that we're just emphasizing that we do want that report.
Perfect.
Yeah. Okay. But Mr. Mayor, I do have one comment as well.
Okay, doke. Councilmember Lingle.
I expected Mr. Stasi to stick around for this. I think he was, but it was starting to get late for him. At the the NCPA meeting in Sacramento this past week, traditionally on I believe the second night, all of the cities that participate in the meeting bring a couple bottles of wine from their community. And I'm very proud to say that for the second year in a row, the city of Lompoc won the gold medal for a local white wine from, is it Karen? Karen? And I wish I could remember the varietal. But no, it wasn't a Chardonnay.
No, it was a Grenache.
It was a Grenache Blanc, yes, Grenache Blanc. Thank you. So the second year in a row, a local wine from Lompoc won a gold medal at our NCPA meeting in Sacramento.
Were you able to take some orders for that from the participants while you were there on behalf of our local winery?
Well, I'd have to say that is for sale. CC's Uptown Cafe Wine Shop for I guess I don't know if I'm allowed to say that dollar amount. Anyway, it is for sale. It's a very good wine. I encourage people to go and get it.
Good salesman there. Outstanding. Are there any other reports? I would just simply say to the public, if anyone would be interested in finding out all the things that we learned at the League of Cities new mayors and council members workshop, I would be happy to loan my book out for education. And are there anything else? Okay, seeing no one else, we are adjourned to the budget goal setting workshop at 9 a.m. on Thursday, February 10th. The first item on the Council Redevelopment Agency requests and announcements deals with a project for downtown, and I'm a participant in a couple businesses down there, and Councilmember Starbuck is a participant in a property down there. So we're going to go out in the lobby and sit in the soft chairs, and Mayor Pro Tem Lingle will take over the meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Actually, I will not have to call Mr. Tim Sales to the podium. This is Mr. Tim Sales. Tim is going to give us a presentation on new market tax credits and the funding program.
Well, good evening. I'm Tim Sales, and I'm happy to be here. I think we have a presentation that we can use. There we go. So, Councilmember Lingle, and appreciate your sponsoring me to come up and speak to you today. And to Linda on the redevelopment staff, thanks for your help in organizing this. And also to the Chamber and all the stakeholders that have been to the couple meetings we've had previous to this. So I'm an urban planner who's worked professionally as an economic development consultant, and I specialize in helping clients understand how to make real estate and economic development projects feasible. And today I'm here just to speak about a form of financing that I think that has some potential applications to projects that have been ongoing in Lompoc. So generally, the idea behind it is this notion of tax credit financing. As a council member just said, there's a program called New Market Tax Credits, which is something the federal government sponsors. And I just want to walk you through kind of some graphs that show how it works. I've tried a lot of different ways to explain it. It is a very technical thing, but I think when you think about how you can afford to buy your house or build a project or that kind of thing, I think you kind of understand some of this. So in this first column here, you have what I might consider a traditional project. In all these examples, let's just assume for sake of argument you have a $1 million project. In the good old days, you might have $300,000 or 30% of your own money as equity and $700,000 or 70% of money that would be a loan. So you can see over here a commercial loan and owner equity. Very simple. What the tax credits do is allow you to actually apply for, and if you receive an allocation, you're actually allowed to get from the government a subsidy which is equal to about 39% of your investment. And that comes in as additional dollars from other investors who can benefit from those tax credits. And you might be able to actually keep $300,000 of your own equity in it, get $390,000 of tax credit equity. It's kind of like free money. We'll talk about it more in a second. And then have a mortgage or a loan of $310,000. So that's why this is called theoretical new market tax credits, because it's not quite that simple, but I wanted to show a very simple example because the tax credit is 39% of whatever your investment is. But what happens over time is that actually, as you see here, it costs something to actually find investors to be able to invest in that, and they want a certain return on their money. So as all is said and done, you get about 70% of that 39 cents on the dollar. So again, $1 million project. This is sort of new market tax credits after investor financing costs. Still, you have $300,000 of your own equity, and you have about $275,000 of this net new market tax credits, and then the rest is a loan. So as you can see, for projects that maybe have a little bit of a gap or need to be have a little bit of outside financing and to make them a little bit better deals or better returns, new market tax credits can help. So what is it specifically? New market tax credits is a competitively administered economic development assistance program run by the U.S. Treasury since 2001. Its current authorization is for $7 billion of tax credits over the next 2 years. And what is a tax credit? Well, in this case, it's 39% of whatever your investment is over 7 years. So in the previous examples, $1 million, if you got tax credits, you'd have a $390,000 tax credit to offer to somebody. If you had a lot of tax liability, maybe you use it yourself. But traditionally, the way it works is you sell it to people like big banks and so on who have lots of tax liability. And in return for selling it to them, they make a direct investment in your project. So it's a way of getting outside capital into your project, and the capital is incentivized by these tax credits that the federal government allows to be issued. And of course, it's money from the feds because it's really money that they don't collect in taxes. So it's not, you know, it's the difference of actually taking tax dollars from our pocket and putting it in someone else's. It's sort of income that they forego. That's why they limit the amount that they actually issue every year. But it's changing all the time. In fact, yesterday the Obama administration proposed increasing it by another $2 billion for next year. So it's a very popular program. It's very complicated. There's a lot of like these crazy federal monk ears and acronyms. So I'll read this bottom bullet to you, but it's not meant to put anyone off. It's just kind of typical federalese. The tax credit is based on a qualifying equity investment. That means dollars from somebody outside who's making that investment in a community development entity. That means an organization who's sponsoring the transaction into a qualifying low-income community investment. That means the actual investment in the community. So, you might say, okay, Lompoc Theater, let's say it needs $5 million. That would be the Q-Licky, real cute names. And the CDE would be the organization sponsoring the transaction, and the QEI would be the money coming from the outside partners. A lot of legalese, and it's an important issue because the benefit of this is free money. The downside to it is it's kind of complicated and requires a lot of expert lawyers and so on. I've talked about this a lot to people, and a couple things I just wanted to really emphasize. It's a competitive program. There's no guarantee that an allocation will be given to any applicant. They're oversubscribed by 2 to 1. It requires an investment to be made by others before the new market tax credit investment can be generated. I mean by that is that you don't start off your project thinking, I'm just going to get a new market tax credits. You start out your project thinking, I need to do something. There's an economic reason to do it. You have a set of financing that you're going to use to get that program going, and then you add the new market tax credits to make it better. It's not a grant. So it has to be something that's related to a project which makes economic sense, and the new market tax credits kind of are the icing on the cake. They improve the performance of the project, or maybe they just kind of close the final gap in the project. The good news, though, is that any other public or private subsidy that goes in these projects can be used on that base. So if for some reason you got some money from the state or from the redevelopment agency, that can go in as well. So I have a slide here. There we go. So this is the previous one I was showing you before. This is the one I left you with. But let's say that actually there was another $100,000 of financing somehow, like a government subsidy. Maybe, for example, Linda Wortman and the RDA has money for seismic upgrades of buildings. Maybe a building might get $100,000. Well, that goes towards actually increasing the amount of investment, and you'll notice that the amount of the tax credit goes up. So the benefit is you can double dip, as you say. The more dollars you put in, doesn't matter where they come from, it benefits you because you get more and more tax credits. So it kind of feeds upon itself. So in this scenario, maybe actually it allows you to do a bigger project, or in this scenario, maybe it just allows you to change how much the private owner needs to put in as a mortgage, because sometimes projects don't work with a certain size mortgage. So the way that you put this government subsidy in and how you take advantage of it, it's totally a policy decision. I just want to show that the subsidy adds to the benefit. Lastly, you can also layer different kinds of tax credits. You benefit because you have some historic buildings in your downtown, and there's actually a long-standing federal tax credit for historic buildings. So a building which is actually eligible for the National Register, which is a list of historic buildings in the United States, you can get a 20% tax credit. If your building's older than built before 1936, as most are in Old Town, you can get a 10% tax credit. So between 10 and 20% of your project costs can be issued as a tax credit. The benefit of this is actually it's a pretty big number. The 39% I mentioned earlier is over 7 years. Well, this is 10 or 20% in 1 year. So investors really like this because they get their money in and out quickly. So it benefits you because you can actually add additional money into the project. So this is the same project here, but now because of this additional tax credit, now you've got more financing capacity in the project. So kind of an introductory primer there. I mean, there's a lot more to this, but I just wanted to give you a sense that it basically allows you to do more with what you've got. So who are the players? Well, the property owners are the players because ultimately the property owners are the ones who are providing feasible projects that require capital investment. So you don't do this just for your health. You do it because you have a project you need to get accomplished, whether it be, you know, renovating buildings in Old Town, whether it be a new development at the corner of Ocean and H, whether it be the historic Lompoc Theater. Doesn't matter. Whatever kind of project it is, it needs to be something that kind of makes sense or is close to making sense before you pursue the tax credits. It needs a program sponsor, that CDE. The program sponsor is oftentimes, it's always a private non-governmental agency, but it could be for-profit, it could be non-profit, but you need to have, a lot of times it's non-profit, and they're there to sponsor it and to play the intermediary between the public, between the investors who are outside the community wanting the tax credits and the projects in the community that need the investment. The outside investors I mentioned, the city, you know, it's not a city it's not really a city project. It's a city, the city can be a catalyst for change and encourage these kinds of developments. That's why I'm here today. Later on the agenda is a staff report to authorize some money to engage me and an attorney to help put together a concept for how you might use this in Lompoc. And then lastly, consultants, lots of consultants. There is a cost overhead for this kind of stuff, but we make it as efficient as possible. So how might the city proceed? And by this I mean, you know, tonight Linda is going to bring forward later on a staff report for a possible funding of a consultant fee to go out and basically do these following work tasks: to continue the work we've done with the chamber and create a multi-property owner entity concept. The reason we need to look at this is because to be able to be efficient, this financing is complicated and it's expensive. It's best to have between $5 and $10 million worth of projects that you want to invest in. So we're thinking actually might need to put together several different properties into one project, and we need to look at how we can do that. And I've had some preliminary discussions with an attorney who's an expert in this area, and he has some ideas for that. We need to evaluate the economic potential of those projects. So what's the reality of where these buildings are at? The city right now is doing a great job encouraging and sponsoring seismic review of some of these buildings, so they're going to identify what needs to be done. We need to figure out then what can be done in an economic sense. Could the buildings make more money after they were renovated? That would be a good thing, and that would create value that we could capture into this program. So kind of like a little mini economic study. And then from those two tasks, present a project package to the stakeholders, come back to the chamber and to the city council and interested parties and say, here's how you could do it. Does it make any sense to you? Do you want to pursue it? Because here's the pros and cons. Here's the risks and rewards of it. And then basically outreach to some of these community development entities who might actually be sponsors for us. And lastly, come back and say, great, we've got a game plan in line. Here's what we think we can do, and the next steps for then implementing this. So right now, this $7 billion, there will be a notice of funds availability sometime this spring. They have not yet announced when it's going to be released. So they're a little quiet. It's surprising. By this time last year, they actually had announced it. It should come here in the next 60 to 90 days. This scope of work that we talk about later is something we could do in 4 to 6 weeks, pending the availability of the stakeholders and so on. So we could get a jump on that and kind of figure out what could be done if you guys want to pursue that. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Sales. Does the council have any questions for Mr. Sales? Councilmember Martin.
Thank you, Councilmember Lingle. What's going on with the microphones? They're sounding somewhat funny. Hi, thank you for your presentation. Help me understand this.
Sure.
Your fourth bullet on your third page. The tax credit is based on a qualifying equity investment,
Right.
which would be basically the property owners?
Well, the qualifying equity investment is, in most cases, an outside organization who has a very large tax liability who's trying to basically buy these tax credits.
So it would be an investor?
It could be like Bank of America. I mean, it could be someone like that, an investor. It could be large or small, but they want to give you dollars and buy those tax credits
Okay. So let's say the property owner will have to attract this investor so this investor can get these tax credits. And let's think of a scenario. The property owner owns this property. That property owner will have to probably get an equity loan or something, or what does the property owner has to give to the investor?
Well, the first thing is the property owner needs to have a good reason to want to pursue it. So as part of this sort of ongoing process of trying to upgrade downtown, there has to be a business case made to that property owner that, well, okay, I've owned this building a long time, I don't owe anything on it, or I owe this much, I can improve it for this much, I can then charge more rent. So there's a little economic analysis to figure out what makes sense for them. And then there's going to be a dollar investment that they probably would make in that building based on various funding sources, maybe a regular loan they would get from a bank, maybe dollars they might get from the redevelopment agency to make that project happen. And then that investment, that totality of investment, is what then would be able to capture the tax credits.
The totality of it. So it is the property owner plus the investor.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Everybody that puts money in the pot.
Every dollar that goes in pretty much is capable of then being eligible to get that 39 cents on the dollar.
But the city doesn't. If the city were to put money in it.
Well, if the city put like $100,000 in, that's for the benefit of the project. The city doesn't get the tax credits. The project gets the tax credits.
Okay. Okay. So the tax credit is going to the project, but how does it get divvied up? In the owners of this project is the property owner, the investor.
Right.
The investor. So what? They'll divvy up the tax credits.
No, what happens
that the
is
city
this, that theoretically there's two things. If you were a property owner that had a large tax liability, you could use it yourself, but that almost never happens. So what usually happens is that you have a project, it supports a certain level of tax credit investment. The CDE, this intermediary, is someone who's basically got relationships with investors. They're saying, okay, I've got these kinds of projects, a bundle of projects, and they generate, let's just pull a number, $2 million of tax credits. They then basically sell those tax credits to these third parties, investors who have a tax liability, and usually about at 70 cents on the dollar. So then in return for that, the people who have a tax liability, the investors, get tax credits to offset their tax liabilities, and then they give the CDE dollars, real dollars of investment, then pass through to these projects. So the actual property owner is not so much involved in the tax transaction. They're involved in some sort of partnership or some sort of legal entity structure that benefits through this sort of structure of different kinds of capital investment coming in.
So really the tax credit is being set up for those organizations that have a tax liability.
Exactly. Yeah, it's like in the good old days. In the 80s, there used to be a lot of these syndicates for people who had tax liabilities. They put together a bunch of people that have tax liabilities, and they would invest in these projects. Now it's more corporatized.
Okay. The second question is on the same bullet, this community development entity. This would be an organization that gets set up to basically, if I understand it, to manage, if you wish.
Yes. So
projects, but manage financially, administratively.
Yeah, they would be the program manager for that. It usually is not a specifically purpose-built organization. Usually an existing nonprofit or other organization would be the sponsor of it. And basically, they're the ones who are assisting with figuring out the structure, negotiating that structure, and then basically are responsible for making sure that compliance occurs. Because you have to keep these investments going for about 7 years, and so you got to make sure people are a lot of accounting and legal compliance issues. So they'd be like the intermediary. So it could be a nonprofit. It could be the CDE could be a local CDE, or it could be one. Sometimes you actually go through larger CDEs that are already set up. Could be anywhere. Could be there's a big one called Clearinghouse CDFI that does a lot of projects out of Orange County. They're basically just intermediaries that are matching up people who want to put money in to get tax credits and projects that need investment.
Okay. And the last one is the qualifying low-income community investments, and I believe that this is where the city has some role to play.
Well, that is the actual investment in the community.
Okay. Where's the low-income thing come from?
Well, the low-income is basically there's designations for census tracts, and there are census tracts in Lompoc that qualify in downtown.
So you're talking basically that we need to be within the RDA zone. So there is no...
to be in certain locations. The investments, that terminology means they need to be community investments in certain locations that meet the requirements that the Treasury has set up.
So it's basically it's our RDA map.
Not exactly. Not exactly. It's actually not related to the RDA. It's something the U.S. Treasury set up. In fact, it's probably going to change soon with regards to the 2010 census. But it's census tract based, and there's certain. One of the indicators is any census tract that has more than 20% poverty indicator is included. There's about 4 or 5 different designations, but it's not something that the city designates. It's actually something the feds do.
Okay, so to be part of this project, you would have to be within this area, and I assume that our downtown area qualifies for it.
Yes, the downtown area qualifies for it.
Okay, if there were to be some other property owner that is not within the downtown area, however, is still within this area, that's, somewhere across town or something.
You need to look at it, and then there's also a category. There's a category that's a little broader, which is related to you can sometimes fund a project which provides benefits to low-income communities, even if it's not located in the census tract. So you might have the address of a particular business or organization which is not in the census tract, but they provide services to an affected population which is low-income, in which case they could be an eligible recipient or participant.
Okay, well, thank you. I'll
You're
have
very
more
welcome.
questions when we get to the agenda item.
Councilmember Costa.
Thank you, Councilmember Lingle. Now, although I understand that this isn't a grant, looking at it from my perspective as a grant writer, the way that I see it, when I work with a client and I'm given a certain amount of money to write a grant, again, there's no guarantee that the application will receive the funds, which, of course, in this instance, it looks like we're about 50% because it's looking about 2 to 1. Is there any benefit to the city having put up that cost if we don't receive the new market tax?
Yeah, actually, it's a great question, council member. Yes, in fact, I believe there is. What I'm proposing to do as part of the work scope is actually sit down and meet with whatever private stakeholders and property owners are interested in downtown and talk to them about their properties, understand sort of the economic realities of their properties. And I think that's a valuable educational process, both for the city as well as for the property owners to understand kind of what's possible. Because many times these kind of assets have been in families a very long time, and they have a lot of deferred maintenance, or they haven't had investment in a long time, and they don't even have a sense of what may be possible with their investment if they actually were to make them a more modern, competitive types of real estate assets. A lot of the properties in downtown are functionally obsolete. So although the economy is certainly down, the types of retail users who might go in there are limited because certain kinds of retail users only want certain more spaces that have more modern facilities, whether that be infrastructure and certainly life and safety issues and that kind of thing.
Wonderful, but I appreciate that, and I definitely do see value in that. To add on to that question, would the information that you put together, if we're not given the new market tax credit this time, is it something that then we could reapply for using that same information?
We could reapply for it. Okay. And I can only say that there's 2 rounds that are actually programmed right now. It's been a very popular program, and it tends to be fairly bipartisan because of the nature of the investment. It's really, the feds have gone more towards a tax credit model than a direct funding model because they feel that it benefits the private sector by leveraging private investment. Right. So I think there's more likelihood these types of things will continue on. But yeah, so certainly the education process, it's really getting up to bat each time and trying to swing for it. So yeah, you could definitely reuse all the information time and time again.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Mr. Sales, if you might stick around for just a second. I'd like to invite the public up and see if they have any questions or comments about this program. Thank you.
You want my name and all that? Oh, my name is Mark Donars. I'm one of the property owners in Old Town. And a couple items that Mr. Sales mentioned was, and I guess these questions are directed to you, when you talk about the economic potential and the infrastructure, one of the problems that the property owners have is a lack of public parking. At one time, some years back, there was a proposal to turn the old mobile station, which is on the corner of 8th Street and Ocean Avenue, into a public parking lot. Very attractive parking lot, but for some reason it died. And the people I've spoken to, when you come to economic potential, they're saying, how do you recover the money that you put back into it if you still have the parking problem and you can't attract people to come in and rent your property at a decent price? So I think this has to be a consideration in this whole, I'd like to suggest that this be a consideration in this whole plan, because I don't think you're going to get a whole lot of support from private individuals without addressing the parking problem downtown. And that proposal existed, and it was very popular at the time. People were really encouraged, property owners, because they felt that now there's a chance to have parking. Most of the parking downtown is 1 hour parking, very limited, and it's hard to attract people that come in and shop unless you have a parking lot close by. So at any rate, that was my comment.
Well, I certainly agree. That's a great comment. I think that, and I'm sorry, I tend to talk in certain phrases. What I mean by that is certainly, functional obsolescence is all about that. I mean, it's about not only the building, but the infrastructure, the access, the parking, and I think in an old town environment, the overall experience of being in an old town. And certainly the city has done a lot of good things to invest in the placemaking and the streetscape and all that. So I mean, there's a real experience there. But I think parking is part of that, and I think certainly as we talk to the property owners that are willing to talk to us, we should gather that input, because things of that nature, I don't think there's a market for paid parking in Lompoc. But I mean, the reality is that those kinds of things, all that stuff is game for these kinds of financing. It just becomes an issue of how it's paid for, because again, this is a gap closing or a return improving type of a funding source. It's not the first block in your wall. It's the top block.
Thank you, Mr. Sales. If the city were to agree to work on an agreement, a contract with you and your company, could your report incorporate a recommendation on parking for the downtown area? Could that possibly?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it would be great to. I mean, the approach that I would take with this is driven very much by what the property owner's reality is, and then getting a very quick sense of the market opportunity from the competitive market areas, as well as from maybe talking to some of the local retail brokers, and so we can get some sense from local area experts about some of the impediments. So absolutely, I mean, anything that sticks up its head, we'll put in there, because it's part of, a larger economic development strategy, which I'm very supportive for how you guys envision the future of the city.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Sales. Does anyone from the council have any more questions? Okay. There is no action required on this. This was just an informational presentation, so we will call the mayor and Councilmember Starbuck back.
Okay, our second item under Council Redevelopment Agency requests will be a project update on the feasibility study for the Santa Ynez River bank stabilization at Riverbend Park Bikeway from our civil engineer, Craig Dearling.
Thank you, Mayor and council members. My name is Craig Deerling of the City Engineering Division, and this is a update on City Project number CS08S2, the feasibility study for the San Ynez Riverbank stabilization at Riverbend Park Bikeway. To address erosion concerns on the San Ynez riverbanks, the city engaged a consulting team to prepare a feasibility study to study and address these concerns. And our consulting team has finished those studies, which are attached to the staff report, and the team is here tonight to present their findings and recommendations. I'd like to introduce Craig Stewart, the leader of our consulting team, to make his presentation.
Mayor Lynn, council members, it's a pleasure to be here with you. What I'll be doing is providing a summary of the report, the evaluation that our team prepared. And I have to say that we have prettier pictures than the last presentation. The purpose of the evaluation is, well, is guided by, first, that a portion of the westerly bank of the San Ynez River next to near the Riverbend Park has been shown to be retreating over the years. We've been looking to evaluate the cause of the bank retreat and to explore feasible options for slowing or repairing that retreat. To give you an idea of where we're talking about, here's Riverbend Park. Here's Highway 246 going into Ocean Avenue. And this little, it looks very little at this scale, but it's really quite a large erosion feature, I guess is what I'll call it. And it's been in the process of developing over a number of years. Our team, let's see, I guess, there we go. Okay. Our team consists of myself and at Penfield and Smith Engineers, Derek Booth from Stillwater Science, our geomorphologist and geologist, is here with us today, and John Dreher of Rincon Consultants. The historic bank erosion that we're talking about, we have tracked from about 1968 through to the present time. And I have an exhibit here that kind of illustrates what's been going on. If we look at this orange line right here, that illustrates the toe of the riverbank back in 1968. In 1969, we had a big flood, and the river got wider. In addition, and in the coming years, I have various years, and I'll show you in a moment. The bank has continued to retreat, forming this little scoop. In addition, in 1968, this was the path of the water through here, and today, as we look at where the water is, it runs along. Instead of running along the easterly bank, it's running along the westerly bank, and has turned in towards the bank and back out again. So there have been some significant changes. If we want to look at this, I want you to pay attention to, over time, what's gone on with the vegetation on this side of the westerly bank, and what's gone on with this growth of this bulge here of vegetation in the river. Okay, thank you. This is a picture of the river in 1975. Notice how clean the white stretch is a scoured out area, and you'll notice that on the westerly bank, right along here, there's a real healthy growth of vegetation. And what we saw in the other 2009 picture, this big bulge of vegetation is gone. The water is essentially scouring out through here. As we move on to, yeah, we're not moving on. There we go. Okay. 1983, we see with the purple line here that we've lost that healthy line of vegetation along here that acted as a barrier to the erosion, and all of a sudden we have this little scoop. And we start seeing that the river is meandering a little bit. Now we're in the year 2000, 7 years later, and the scoop has grown a little bit, and this vegetation on this side has grown even more. And now we're in 2004. That's this yellow line, and the erosion has significantly increased, and the river now has entirely changed over. The flow of the river has changed over to the westerly bank, and we're back to this 2009. And the edge of the river, the toe of the bank is at this bright green line now, and it's come near it's getting close enough to the Riverbend Park bike path that the city was concerned about what might be happening and what could be done, and if there was a long-term problem. Now I'm going to switch over to a flood inundation map. You'll notice on here that there's two colors of blue. This outside light blue is the 100-year inundation. It pretty much follows what people in the area might call the upper bank or the higher terrace. It represents the flooding that you would have in a very, very large flood. I'm not sure that the last time, if at all, that the city has experienced this extent of a flood. The darker blue here represents what's known to FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, as the floodway, and that represents the area of particularly high velocity water where things are likely to scour. I'm going to just keep remembering this. Well, I guess we're going to have to keep remembering this one. There we go. Okay. In this represents the 10-year inundation, and notice that it follows more closely the what we would call the lower bank, and that's an area that is more likely to get flooded more frequently. It has a different type of geology makeup, a different type of biology. So as we looked at these things, we recognized that in order to evaluate things, we were probably looking at this level of flooding as being reasonable to provide some sort of analysis and protection. So we looked at the various soil types and found that the lower banks in this area tended to be sandy, where the upper banks were more protected and were less likely to erode. We noticed that generally along the edge of the river where the banks were healthy, we had a good riparian habitat. We looked into groundwater elevations, particularly because we know that if we had a high groundwater elevation, that these banks would become saturated and be more likely to erode. And we looked at peak flow rates. We did a pretty extensive analysis of the flood predictions in this area. There's a fair amount of information available. The statistical analysis is based on checking the peak, the highest flow rate at any one time each year, and then putting that into a statistical analysis that can then be hopefully projected for a longer period of time. So we look at return periods that which represent a chance that this level of flooding might happen at any occur once in any particular year. For instance, a 2-year return period would represent a 50% chance of happening in any one year. And as we look at the various types of predictions, I took the flood gauging from the USGS gauges and applied them into a statistical program and came up with a set of peak flows. FEMA had done this back in 1972, and they had come up with their own, using the same methods, but they didn't have as long a period of time, came up with their own numbers. And there's been a paleo flood study that also has adjusted things in accordance with geologic evaluations of the capacity of the channel to carry water. Notice that as you get to the higher flow rates, the least likely floods, there's a lot of discrepancy. But remember that I mentioned that the 10-year flood was what we would be looking at. And you can see that these flow rates are clustered pretty well. There's a fair agreement there. There we go. And so for this reason, because that level of flooding is most likely to occur, it's the one that we can provide reasonable protection for. The differences in the flow rates for the larger storms, I know I've had lots of questions from different people, are not significant because it would be almost impossible to protect from that level of flooding. As we looked into the source of the scour, we became aware that this reach of the river has a significant amount of scour. Every time a big flood comes through, the sediments in the channel, the water just doesn't move over the top of the ground, but it actually moves the ground underneath to a depth of 19 to 25 feet. So you can't just look and say, well, the water's 10 feet deep, because 19 to 25 feet below that, the sediments are also moving. As a team, we looked at sediment transport in a very preliminary manner, and our evaluation indicates that the general reach of this river is in a state of dynamic equilibrium. That means that essentially the sediment coming in is equal to the sediment going out. So you're not having the sediment depositing more than it's eroding. It doesn't mean that things don't go up and down a little bit, but generally things are not changing significantly as far as sediment in this reach, as far as having an increase of sediment or decrease of sediment. There we go. We looked at drainage. It was a concern that some of this erosion might have been a result of drain pipes coming off of the upper terrace or upper bank and eroding out some of the riverbank, maybe saturating it so it was softer or whatever. We looked at that carefully, and based on our observations and review, that doesn't appear to be any more than just a local effect and pattern that is right at the outfall. There doesn't appear to be a general pattern of bank erosion due to that kind of a problem. Now the pretty pictures. This is the erosion feature right on the ground that we're looking at here. This is where the bank is now, and where the bank used to be is over here. The distance between here and there is almost 500 feet. That's an awful lot of land to lose. You not only lost the land and the use of it, but you lost a lot of the vegetation and the utility and the biology that's involved, the animals. Here's some other features. Notice how the bank is very steep. Nothing much is growing on it. And nothing, of course, grows much in the river. We looked at the shape and the progression of the erosion feature, and it looked to us as if we had, here's our erosion feature right here, that it was translating down the channel. Now, you have to realize that as we start looking at a situation with estimating where this erosion is going to go, we can probably make a pretty fair prediction 2 or 3 or 4 years ahead and guessing at if we have major storms or not, what's going to happen. The further out we go time-wise, the less reliable we can make a prediction. It's kind of like the statistics on the flooding. Our best guess is that if nothing is done to curb or stop this erosion, that this erosion feature here will continue down the river. It might be, depending on the flows in the river, it might be 25, it might be 50 years, it might be more than that. If something is done to mend or slow or stop this erosion feature here, it's likely to have follow this green line instead, which impacts fewer of the improvements. This yellow line here impacts, as you can see, here's Riverbend Park. The red lines here are the bikeways, and the yellow line, our best guess of where things would go without any kind of addressing of the erosion, takes out a good part of the bikeway and eventually will wipe out the Riverbend Park. Oops, now we went too far. Back up. Okay. Okay. So our findings for this were, one, that the erosion feature is a natural consequence of large storms. It seems to appear and move only after large storms as we had in 69, 78, 83, 98, 2001, 2005. The erosion feature is negatively affecting the sediment transport. That is, where the river you'd like to have input of sediment equal to output. When you have a rapid increase in the width of the river, that makes it so that the sediment doesn't flow through there as easily, and it negatively affects that sediment transport, which can have impacts downstream. It can have impacts at that point, either increasing erosion downstream or increasing deposition upstream. It's our finding that the feature will likely impact the existing riverbend trail bicycle path within the space of 1 to 2 large storms with a recurrence interval of 10 years or greater, or rather than use the recurrence interval, I'd say that has a chance in any 1 year of occurring, has a 10% chance of occurring in any 1 year. So that's a pretty fair likelihood. The erosion is continuing north and west, and it's translating, so it will continue to erode large areas of land and potentially impact the Riverbend Park. The ongoing erosion will reduce the natural habitat of the native riparian vegetation on the banks by turning it into river bottom, essentially. So as we faced these findings, we said, well, what can we do about it? And we looked at a number of options. We brainstormed and said, what are the craziest things we could think of, and said, okay, let's look at every possible thing we can think of here. And we said, let's do a very brief and preliminary evaluation. So these are some of the options we explored. There we go. Okay. And at this level of review, we said, let's look at the relative cost of each one, the likelihood of receiving permits and approvals. Some of those options just are not acceptable to the permitting agencies, and how well do they actually address ongoing erosion? Not all of those options are created equal. So as we put those options, those many options through the sieve, we came out with actually 5 options, if you consider no project, that we said we could now evaluate in more detail, in which we looked at carefully with longevity. How long would that erosion control option work? How would it fail? Sometimes failures, if they're a rapid failure, you have a problem when the river is running and you lose everything, and it can be catastrophic. You don't want to have a catastrophic failure. We looked at costs, both initial construction costs and design and planning costs, and we looked at the annualized life cycle costs, including maintenance. And we looked at sediment transport in a little bit more detail. Our option 1 that we looked at was a reinforced vegetative bank protection system with just leaving the banks as they are today. This system consists of a series of piles with cables, as you see in a cross section here, that extend out 90 degrees to the bank. So we have several of them extending out into the river. These piles and cables don't actually do the work themselves. What they do is included in the system is vegetation of the creek bottom, and then when there's a storm, the water flows through here, and the debris from the storm collects on the cables, slows the water down next to the bank, and sediment from that flow drops out. And because the flow is so much slower, the vegetation that's been planted doesn't get ripped out. It doesn't get scoured like it does in the rest of the river. And the vegetation then returns much more quickly. So over time, there'll be a laying down of sediment that will eventually build up the bank back to pretty close to where it used to be. The other feature is that because the water goes more slowly around through this system, it pushes the flow path of the river, the high velocity water, out towards the center of the channel, which is where we want it. This approach uses the river's natural abilities, natural processes to slow the water down and to create banks. Thank you. Our second option is option 2, which is exactly the same, except that the very steep bank that's there right now might be laid back and vegetated, just to look nicer. It is very similar. Option number 3 is one that I had seen in some news articles as being suggested by some of the citizens, is putting in a pilot channel and using the spoils from the pilot channel to build a berm or a bench in the river. This is something that this is an approach that has been used further down the river in the past, where there's been an extreme amount of vegetation from willow growth in the river downstream of the wastewater treatment plant. It's never been used in this stretch of the river as far as I could determine. This is generally has a because nothing is vegetated or stabilized, the sediments that are exposed here are easily washed away and don't have as much of a chance of being permanent. As we move on to option 4, is a hybrid of this, where we would use the pilot channel concept and a rock slope protection along the edge. Rock slope protection, some people call it riprap. It would extend down, you would lay the slope back to a 2-to-1 and put rock on the top of a filter fabric or filter layer and have it extend 15 to 20 feet below the grade of the river. This has been used in certain parts of the river successfully. It's always a concern in this part of the river where you have as much scour, 15, 20, 25 foot of scour coming through here, that this type of rock riprap tends to slip down the bank and down into the river. So, or if you have scour at the toe, sometimes you can have a catastrophic failure. Oops. Here. There we go. Option 5 is no project. It would just look like this for the rest of whatever time, and would continue to erode and progress. Our evaluation of this, as I said, looked at the level of protection. We looked at maintenance, longevity, annualized cost, failure mode, and how it affects sediment transport. And here we have our options, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Options 1 and 2 are very similar. Maintenance, just go through each of these categories. Maintenance on this type of a system is rare, consisting of perhaps fixing a cable once in a while. We have systems that are here that have been constructed on the Santa Ynez River that have never been maintained in 20 years, and they're still operating effectively. Based on our evaluation of protecting the lower bank, this type of a system could protect from a 10-year storm, maybe a little bit larger with some overtopping. Based on my experience, this type of a system could last at least 50 years, probably more. There's not a system out there that's been constructed more than 50 years. Our annualized costs are in the $80,000 to $90,000 per year range. That is, if you were going to save money for pay money towards a mortgage for this, you'd be paying $80,000 a year to cover all your costs of construction, design, maintenance, etc. Failure mode is very slow on this sort of a thing. The worst I could even imagine is that you might lose a cable, or one of the piles might get bent. It doesn't fail catastrophically. It still maintains its integrity and still works even after a portion of the system has failed. And because it helps the bank to heal and build up again and maintain that sediment transport, it works well. The pilot channel requires frequent maintenance. That is, it has to be redug probably every 3 to 5 years. Due to the type of permitting, every time it has to be redug, it needs new permitting, which is an additional cost. Its level of protection is only 3 to 5 years because, number one, it's low. Number two, it's not stabilized. And because this occurs frequently, we're looking at an annualized cost that is between $400,000 and $600,000 a year, with a failure mode that, if you get a big flow through there, it can just rip it out very quickly and it's gone. So rapid failure mode, and doesn't do much for the sediment transport. The rock slope protection with pilot channel, option 4, has frequent to moderate maintenance, the frequent being the pilot channel, and the moderate being the rock slope protection. Would provide a 10-year level of protection with the longevity, I'm guessing, of 15 to 25 years without having to do major overhaul. And annualized cost then goes from about $550,000 to $680,000, with a failure mode that, once it starts failing, it can be a rapid failure, and really doesn't do much as far as the sediment transport. It leaves the channel in pretty much the same situation as it is today. And then, of course, no project is what we have, which means that if we take into account loss and replacement of the recreational facilities, we're looking at about $600,000 a year over a 15 or 20-year period. Our recommendation was option 1, and the reason we chose option 1 was that it had lower annualized costs, had the least amount of maintenance. It uses the natural river processes to heal the erosion that's there, let nature doing the job instead of having to have people do it. It's the easiest to permit. We already have 2 of these systems on the San Ynez River, and it's been successfully implemented in a number of places. Here's an example of a location just downstream from Buellton that in 2002 got completely eroded out. It was a CCWA pipeline crosses from this point across the river here, and they were concerned that they were going to lose their pipeline. So immediately after they got a hold of us, we installed a system of these piles and vegetation. It was particularly difficult because this was on a bend in the river. It's much easier to employ these where it's in a straight stretch. I went by there this last June, and this is what the bank looks like now. And I think you might be able to see, I think that's a pile right there. You just can't see them. They fill in and collect the sediment, and the trees like to live there. Lots of animals. If this is the direction the city wants to go, there's a number of things that need to be done next. The preliminary site assessment, a preliminary design, environmental review, and environmental determination by the council here. Full-on design with permitting, preparation of a bidding package, construction of and landscaping plans, and then there's a landscaping maintenance period, which is usually about 5 years. We've have a schedule that I'm not going to go through all the ins and outs here, but if we were to start today working on this, the construction could start in 1.5 to 2.5 years, mainly because of the permitting and environmental concerns. And that's a general summary of the report that I've provided for you. I'm happy to answer any questions. We also have Derek Booth here, our geomorphologist, geologist, who is also happy to help.
Thank you. And from my standpoint, this is an outstanding report. I think you've covered all the bases, and I have learned more about erosion in the past year than I ever wanted to learn, and you've picked up every piece of it and made very good sense of it. Councilmember Starbuck?
Yeah, real quick, I just had a couple of questions. You'd mentioned that downstream that they had cut pilot channels through the willows before. Do you know that for fact?
Oh, yes.
Or was it actually just mowed willows?
Well, it was, I'm sorry, it was mowed.
Yeah, well, when they mowed, what happens to the sediment then? Creates little miniature pylons, doesn't it?
Well, it probably does.
So
yeah.
it does, and it creates a wider river down at the mouth. So technically, if we were to cut a pilot channel, we would actually want to remove the willows down there to flow the river better up here.
We didn't go into off-site, what you'd have to do downstream. What the willow situation down that far down the river is not likely going to affect things this far upstream.
On a high-velocity river and a channel creation, though, that was my question.
I would say that that the distance between the two locations there's not likely going to be any kind of correlation there. Yeah.
Councilmember Lingle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I may have more questions later, but if I could go back to option number 5, I'm confused at the annualized cost of $600,000 with no project.
That involves the loss of the bike path, loss of land that would otherwise be useful. It involves loss of the Riverbend Park baseball diamonds, parking.
I understand now. Thank you.
Councilmember Costa.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I noticed on one of the slides that even if this measure is taken in approximately 10 to 20 years from now, the erosion area may also, or the section of the bike path may still fall into an erosion area?
No, that's if this is protected.
The green dashed line just kind of like really ran close to it in
ran
that slide,
close to
and
it.
I didn't know
Yeah.
how.
I'll tell you, we're doing our best guess on extrapolating things out that far. My guess is that it's going to be okay. I can't guarantee that. What's going to happen probably 50 years down the road.
Make that is understandable.
It's our best extrapolation.
So I guess my question would be, if additional measures are taken, is there any way to then guarantee, that green line won't cross over the bike path, or is that just, 50 years from now?
I think you have to look at that in 50 years from now. I don't know there's a guarantee on this one.
Okay.
And I'm happy to report that that'll be your problem exclusively, Councilmember Costa.
I wasn't going to mention that.
Hence why I asked.
Are there any other questions? Okay, maybe we have anyone in the audience would like to ask a question with regard to this?
I put everybody to sleep.
Mayor and council, I think there's only one other person that was in this room today that was here before '69. The gentleman sitting over there. And I lived along the river, and I lost 3 ranches went through the flood in '69 because you had 2 floods. 2 100-year floods 30 days apart. So, Councilman Starbuck is right, is that in the prior to '69, they had a channel all the way to the ocean, and the trees went out. Dozers are in there cleaning a channel all the way through. Then state and federal agencies come in and put a stop to it. The other problem you have that you may want to look at, I don't think you paid attention, is where the water comes out of the V Street Canal coming out of Magdalena Canyon. That used to be a 22 to 30 foot drop, and because of all the trees down below that sand is coming up. And I don't know what the latest figure is now, but you're getting closer to more and more floods. Now, the real positive, I think the 1 and 2, if we can do a pilot channel down there, but the other thing is that prior to '69, we didn't have the releases coming out of Kachuma now that they're able to do now, and that's saving us a lot of the floods. But we had a lot of land underwater in 1969.
Thank you, Mr. Holmdahl. Is there anyone else? Okay. Having spent quite a bit of time looking at this, I think I would like to ask the council to pursue funding for design and construction of the riverbank stabilization at Riverbend Parkway using the recommendation of the post and cable system in option 1 on page 18. And second, I would recommend that the replacement of approximately 300 feet of washed out post and cable system up near Riverside Drive closer to Highway 246 that was included a little further back in the study. I spoke with our Public Works Director earlier, and he felt that would be a good combination, and that I'll charge the staff with coming back to us with recommendations on how to proceed and where we might acquire funding for this. So basically we take the next step and we as a group select option 1. And I would entertain a second for that. Councilmember Costa?
I'll second that.
Okay. Is there some more discussion on it? Councilmember Lingle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think as a council we have a responsibility, obviously, to do something about this. It's been going on for years now. It's going to continue to go on unless we take some action. And I noticed in your recommendation you asked that someone come back with a funding proposal. That's my question. I mean, we have to do something, but where is the money coming from? That's a big question of mine. So do we have any suggestions on where this money is going to come from?
We've, in chatting about this, we've talked about some things, and actually somebody approached me today with some information, but there wasn't any time to check it out for the meeting, and I think it would just be a matter of going out in search of it. You know, we have the loss of land and habitat. We have the threat of the loss of our bikeway, and ultimately damage to the park, which has been identified in this study. So we have some compelling stories to tell, and it's just a matter of, to coin a phrase, we're going to go fishing. I'm sorry, who's first? Councilmember Martiner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can we get a comment from engineering regarding where would you go and look for funding?
Certainly. Just briefly mentioned in the staff report, the engineering staff is looking at a number of grant opportunities. We are on mailing lists and also checking websites for calls for projects from the federal level, the state level, and so we're pursuing it, looking at what the applications entail, and would be happy to return with information on that.
Mr. Bean, could you comment on your discussion we had earlier about kind of being shovel ready and what the advantages of that are in moving forward with this? I thought that was a good point.
All right. It's been our experience if we could have a project designed and the plans and specs ready to go, that we'd have a better chance of funding if a grant would come up. So I think the approach we'll take is try to look for some funding to find that estimated $160,000 to get through the design and environmental process, and that may help us in obtaining a grant.
And that's basically the policy we followed in the past that has been successful for us.
Well, it has been for some street projects. Through the last economic downturn, when a stimulus package came out, that really helped us to obtain some more money for our bike path, for instance, because it was in place and ready to go. So we haven't done a river project, obviously, but in our experience, it's worked.
And one other thing you might share was your comment about being ready when the next flood came, I guess, is how when we talked about that.
Well, obviously we'd like to have this in place before the next 10-year storm came. Something around 30,000 cubic feet per second in the river could take us back another 50 feet. We don't want that to happen, so we'd like it sooner than later.
Thank you. Councilmember Costa.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to confirm that the bidding process wouldn't begin for another 1 or 2 years from now. Is that correct? As long as we can receive about $160,000 for those first initial steps?
That's correct.
Okay, great. And then if I could request a change to my second really quickly, just if that's okay with you, that the staff actually break up the report, because right now we're looking at about $1.2 million just for this section, and if they could break out the other part that you had requested farther upstream as a separate amount so we can see the cost of both of those.
I so amend my motion, and you so amend your second?
Yes.
Okay. Is there any other discussion from the council? Okay. Can we have a little vote on this subject, please? And that passes 5-0. I'd like to thank the city staff and the folks at Penfield and Smith for an outstanding presentation. Thank you very much. You know, this is an opportune moment. Why don't we take about a 8-minute break, and the magic timer's coming on, so everybody watch the clock. Okay, next we'll have a report on the Prisma Road Safety Improvement Project from Public Works Director Larry Bean.
Good evening, Mayor Lynn, council members, members of the public. I guess I'd use the Yogi Berra term, deja vu, all over again. I've been here talking about this before, but here we are. As you all know, Caltrans has proposed a roundabout for safety improvement at Prisma Road and Highway 246, just outside the city limits. They held a public hearing July 16th, 2008, in these council chambers to show a couple of different solutions, one including a traffic signal, the roundabout is the other. And then they held a second meeting April 22nd, 2009. Their purpose was to try to decrease the number of T-bone or broadside type accidents, and the solution they came up with was a roundabout. In their estimation, the roundabout has a much less chance of having a broadside collision. The types of collisions in the roundabout are usually a side swipe type collision, and I believe that's why Caltrans picked it. They figured there still may be accidents, but they would be far less likely to have injuries or deaths. They have gone through a portion of their design process and right-of-way acquisition, and they tell Kevin and I, Kevin McCune, city engineer, that they're ready to list the project in April and advertise it in June of 2011, a few months away. So we have a short time frame. I've composed a letter generally stating that the city of Lompoc opposes the construction of the proposed roundabout and urges Caltrans to select an alternative improvement such as a traffic signal or a lane widening with restriping. It is your decision to decide to send the letter or not, choose a roundabout for outside of town, traffic signal. I'll send the letter. Any questions? I'd be happy to answer.
Councilmember Lingle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Bean, in addition to this letter, and I don't know if can we also send a letter to SB CAG and the county supervisors and ask them to write a letter of recommendation to Caltrans also supporting our letter? I mean, in other words, a three-pronged effect. Can we tie this into that? Asking them to write the same thing?
Certainly that would be your choice to direct staff to send letters to other organizations.
Okay. Okay, that's a possibility then.
Councilmember Costa.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilmember Lingle and any other individuals looking at this letter who have ideas, I'm just curious, in council's opinion, what a better alternative is to the roundabout?
The better alternative would be a on-demand stop sign. Traffic on 246 flows unrestricted as traffic is going by. As a car approaches 246 on La Prisma Road, waits a few minutes, a stoplight comes on, then on 246, traffic stops, one or two cars go out onto 246, immediately the light then turns green and traffic continues to flow. So there'd only be traffic stoppage on 246 when traffic is waiting on La Prisma Road. So it's an on-demand stoplight. And I believe these are just figures I've heard. And I don't know how accurate they are, but the figures are it costs about 1/10 for the on-demand as it would the cost of a roundabout.
I have to interrupt there. I don't believe that's
These are just figures that
Caltrans estimates that the traffic signal costs $1 million more than the roundabout. I don't know if that's how accurate that is, but that's Caltrans' estimate. They listed for us back in April of 2009.
I'm assuming you've had the opportunity to look at that, and from what I saw, the lane widening is the primary cost of that project. And did you see that to be true? I suppose.
Correct. Let's see, what was the date? Earlier this fall, the statement from Caltrans was the cost difference is due to the project footprint of the signal being larger than that of the roundabout. Accommodating the signal required additional vehicle storage during the peak hour by way of a second through lane in each direction so that the volumes could be cleared in a single signal cycle. That was the designer's reason why it cost more.
Thank you. And another question, Councilmember Lingle, because I'd like to just get opinions of the council. The on-demand stoplight, you think would be beneficial because it wouldn't slow down traffic as much as a roundabout would?
Two reasons. Not criticizing or arguing with Mr. Bean, I just find it hard to believe, here again, I find it hard to believe that the cost of an on-demand stoplight would be more than the roundabout. So one of my reasons for bringing this forward in the past was the expense. The other reason is listening to business people, mainly vintners in this area. They feel that a roundabout is going to be an impediment to tourists coming to this community, having to go through a roundabout. Now, granted, everyone will get accustomed to it. I've used roundabouts in residential areas. I've never used them on a freeway. But it's just the idea of a roundabout coming into Lompoc. Businesses here, especially the vintners, feel that it would be an impediment to tourism coming to this community. For those reasons, the cost and the impediment to people coming to this community.
Thank you.
Let me chime in for just a minute, and if you don't mind. I started attending these hearings way back when, and at the initial hearing we discussed, based on some observations from those who were familiar with the intersection, neighbors, the alternative of moving the right-hand turn lane over and installing a new right-hand turn lane and taking the existing right-hand turn lane and making it a painted median, and that would provide about 400 feet of visibility. Initially, Caltrans said they thought that was a good idea and estimated the cost at about $280,000 in conversations they had with me. And then ultimately they said, no, you know what, we don't think that's going to fix everything and we just want to do a roundabout. And they cited repeatedly the Kansas Department of Transportation study as their principal document for bringing this roundabout forward. I did manage to persuade them to make some paint changes in the intersection in late 2009. I don't know exactly when they made those changes, and what it did was they put a pork chop in at the end of the right-hand turn lane, and that allowed them to move the limit line for the stop sign coming out of Parisum Road out about, I think it was 22 feet. And there was also a pork chop that was recommended for the center of the roadway to direct traffic there, but that was not put in. For the year 2010, there were 4 accidents at the intersection. 3 of them involved property damage only, and 1 of them involved what was termed cuts and bruises and property damage. So from an intersection where we in the past had averaged 1 high-speed side impact with serious injuries, or 2 per year, we went to 0. And that restriping really only partially addressed the increase in visibility that you would have with that 400-foot view lane, if you will. And that is a substantially lower cost. Additionally, about 4 months ago, I found somebody in Kansas and said, hey, have those roundabouts on the high-speed roads work for you back there? And he said, what roundabouts? Because he had lived here in Lompoc. And I said, you know, those high-speed roundabouts on the highway. He said, well, we don't have any in this part of Kansas, but I got a friend over at Kansas DOT and Department of Transportation, and I'll ask him. And he called me back a couple days later and said, we don't have any of those. I said, well, you know, this was cited in the Caltrans study. And he said, well, here, my friend at Kansas DOT sent me this study. You should read it. So it was 180 pages. And I'm not going to tell you I read the whole thing, but the important things to note were that they used roundabouts as a replacement for a signalized intersection that already exists. So it's the next step after a signalized intersection, number one. And they're recommended for roadways where the current aggregate speed is 35 miles an hour or less. So this highway has a 55-mile-an-hour speed and isn't really even suitable for a roundabout under the Kansas study that they talked about at length. And I have the study. I brought it down. It's in my office if anybody would like to read the 172 pages. And the pertinent ones are flagged. So there's my 10 cents worth. And I think Councilmember Starbuck, you were next, then Councilmember Martner. Okay. Councilmember Martner?
We have discussed this subject in the past before, and I don't find any new facts that have been presented here. I still hear this, you know, so-and-so said that tourists are not going to come. I don't know of any facts that tourists are not going to come because we have a runabout. If Caltrans is misinforming the public regarding a runabout in Kansas, I think the state needs to take that on battle because this is a state agency. And, you know, if the government is doing the bad thing and giving, you know, misinformation to the public, they should be told so. So, you know, if you want to write a letter to the state and have an investigation regarding the report on Caltrans, on what kind of information and facts they're misgiving us, maybe you need to approach it that way. But it's totally out of our jurisdiction to continue to talk about this. If Caltrans has major problems, I think the state needs to deal with it, not this city right now.
Thank you. Anyone else who would like to speak on this? Is there anyone in the audience that would like to address this subject? Seeing no one rise. The one other thing I would recommend with regard to this letter is that it be addressed to Richard Krumholtz, the district director, rather than the project manager, because he is the one that has the decision-making power. And I would also ask that the council direct the city administrator and myself to pursue the political solution along the lines of what Councilman Lengel recommended, which is to seek other agencies to become involved in this. Should also note that the traffic engineer that did our city traffic study for the general plan indicated that this was not an advantageous use of a roundabout. I'd accept a motion.
Did you make a motion? You're looking for a second?
I could make that as a motion. There we go. Consider it done.
And I'll second.
All right. Is there any other discussion? Councilmember Costa?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to have to personally disagree as well with Councilmember Lingel's cost analysis, as well as the issue of stopping tourists. Based on personal experience, I've experienced roundabouts in Europe, in South America, as well as in the western United States. And my personal experience, oddly enough, I actually saw a fatal accident happen at a T about 5 miles after I went around a roundabout. I was the first on the scene. Ironically, this happened in Nevada. So I understand the extremity, the need of a solution at this location, but I agree that I'm going to have to trust the cost information that we have received, and I don't believe that it will be a hindrance to anybody entering or exiting our town. So for that reason, I'm going to vote against sending this letter off.
Councilmember Martner?
I will oppose the motion as well. Again, like I said the last time when I voted against this, is that I think this needs to be left to the experts. And if the experts are wrong, the proper channels would be that the state takes care of it. Because I really don't want to make decisions based on hearsay. And all of what I heard tonight was just hearsay. I have not received any facts. Thank you.
Any other comments from the council? Can we vote, please? And that passes 3-2. Thank you. And now moving to the consent calendar. Oops, sorry, skipped one. Thanks, guys. First, with regard to the consent calendar, I wish to confess that at our last council meeting, there was an item noted on the consent calendar that I was reclusing myself from because it was a check to my corporation, and although it was on the agenda, which is what's required legally, I usually announce that, and I didn't, and someone out there in TV land caught it and called me on it, and thank you for that. We all make mistakes, and I freely admit it. This evening we have check voucher number 296235 for $75 made out to Speedy Load and Towing that I will not be participating in. Are there any items on the consent calendar that a council member would like to have withdrawn? Seeing none, I would accept a motion to approve the consent calendar. Councilmember Martiner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I make the motion that we approve the consent calendar.
And a second, Councilmember Costa.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I second.
And is there any further discussion on behalf of any council member? Okay, could we vote, please? And that passes 5-0. And we will now move to appointments. Would the council prefer to take all of these as a lump, or would you prefer to take them commission by commission? Is there any thoughts on that? Okay. How about if we take all of them except the single-purpose commission, and we'll do those, and then we'll take the single-purpose commission because it's a little bit different. So first we have Councilmember Costa, nomination for the Human Services Commission. Go ahead.
I'm nominating Michael Martinez for the Human Services Commission.
And Michael, I know you're out there, so why don't you
second
stand?
that nomination.
Yeah, thank you. Why don't you stand up and be recognized? Is there anything you'd like to say to the council, or you just want to wave? Thank you very much. And it's been moved and seconded for Mike Martinez for the Human Services Commission. We vote on that, please. And that passes 5-0. The next one are the appointments of the individuals for the single-purpose committee to review the city's building planning engineering process. You know, they're not in that order in my book. What order are they in yours? Okay, mine's different. All right, I back up. We'll go to the Airport Commission, and that would be a term expiring in 2015, and that is an at-large position not selected by an individual council member, so it would be my pleasure to move for the approval of Mr. Mendables. If I could have a second, please.
I'll second it.
All right. Oh, sorry. Hi.
Mr. Mayor, item 12 has 2 appointments, so you're jumping from one of the items on item 12 to item 13. We have the single purpose committee under item 12.
Oh, see, we have to do the single purpose committee first. Okay. All right, Councilmember Costa, you were watching me tonight. Okay, so we'll unwind that and we'll go back to the single purpose committee. And how about if we each made our nomination for that, starting with Councilmember Martiner.
Mike Saminsky.
I nominate Aaron Briggs.
Okay. I nominate Jim Dixon.
I nominate Oscar Warner.
And I'm nominating James White.
And all of you who are in the audience, if you would be kind enough to stand up. There's Jim. Okie doke. Any other discussion on the part of the council? Okay, we can move to approve that. And that passes 5-0. And now we go to item 13, which is, how about if we take these as a group? We have the Airport Commission, which I would nominate Ed Mendables. For the Park Pool Oversight Commission, I would nominate Ken Ostini. And for the Youth Commission, I would nominate Maribel. I'm going to kill it. No, I'm still trying Maribel's last name. Anguiano, Cameron Filburn, Carla Jimenez, Camden Owens, and Edith Vargas. And I would entertain a second for those.
I'll second those appointments.
Okay. And if any of you were here, would you stand to be recognized, please?
Mr. Mayor, if
Yes.
I may point out that all the youth from the Youth Commission were here earlier, but it started to get
They
pretty
had to go
late
to
and they
school.
left for homework,
Yeah.
but they were all here this evening.
And recognize Mr. Owens in the back. Mr. Owens, did you have anything you wanted to say? Yes. Well, you will convey to us that we were sad we missed them too, and perhaps you could come back at a next council meeting. We'll put you at the head end. Okay. It's been moved and seconded for this group of nominations, and could we all vote, please, unless there's any other discussion? Seeing none? And that passes 5-0. Thank you. With regard to item 14, the property owner was here earlier and was extremely ill and had to go back home, and I understand that this is just an assessment. I'm wondering, City Attorney, if we could continue this item without causing any grief.
Yes, you could.
Okay, I would feel better about that. I spoke to the individual in the lobby, and so if the council would agree, I would move to continue that item until the next meeting. Do we need to do a vote on that? Yes, we do. Okay, in a second, please.
I'll second that, but I actually have a quick question for, for City Administrator Barcelona. On future reports about abatement, is there any way to get a photo of the property included in the report?
Yes, that can be provided.
Thank you, and I also second that.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to continue this item. Is there any further discussion on that? Okay, can we vote, please? And that passes 5-0 to continue the item. I'd like to thank the council for that. Okay, item 15. City Attorney, could you address the City Administrator, do you want to speak to the withdrawal of that?
Mr. Mayor and Council, City Clerk Stacy Alvarez received a request from the applicant, Mr. Mendy, of 805 Taxi Cab Mendy International, requesting that this item be continued to the meeting of March 1st.
Thank you. And as a matter of course, we generally approve these requests. If there's no objection, I'll accept a motion to continue the item.
I would like to see if there's anybody in the public who would like to speak, because that was part of the email we received.
Yeah. There were people who asked about that earlier, and is there anyone here that wanted to speak on this subject at this time? Seeing no one rise, we'll close that. And I'd accept a motion to continue this item to the date that the city administrator mentioned.
Just for the record, you're actually not closing the public hearing, you're just continuing it.
Continuing, I'm sorry. Thank you. Continuing the public hearing to the date that the city administrator mentioned. And accept a motion on that. Councilmember Costa?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move that we continue the application to a future, the public hearing to a future date.
To a date certain.
To a date certain.
Which is 1 March?
1 of March.
March 1st. Okay.
I'll go ahead and second it.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to continue this item to March 1st. Is there any other discussion from the council? Seeing none, could we vote, please? And that passes unanimously. We both do. And the next item will be board consideration of the use of tax increment funding for a consultant contract dealing with the Old Town area, from which Councilmember Starbuck and I shall recluse ourselves and once more go to the lobby and leave it in Councilmember Lingle's able hands.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Linda?
Okay. Well, I was going to say honorable chair, but I'll say board members. At the council meeting of January 18, 2011, the board directed agency staff to schedule a presentation from Tim Sells on new market tax credits and present a cost package report. The presentation was given earlier tonight by Mr. Sells, and staff is now presenting the requested cost package report that was submitted by Mr. Sells. The scope of work Mr. Sells proposes is attached to the staff report for board consideration. If the board approves Mr. Sells' proposed scope of work as submitted, staff requests the board authorize the executive director or her designee to execute all documents necessary to enter into a contract not to exceed $10,000 to perform an analysis in accordance with his report, and direct general counsel to prepare an appropriate agreement. This concludes staff's report.
Thank you, Ms. Warren. Does the council have any questions?
Thank you, Councilmember Lingle. My first question is, in the conclusion of the report, there is a sentence that states, additionally, if the property owners are successful in forming a group and submitting a successful application, it, quote, could be the incentive property owners need to renovate their buildings, perform the necessary deferred maintenance, and improve their leasable space, which would encourage new business to locate to Old Town. Now, I understand that in applications such as these, everything is on a could-be basis. But my question is, if these property owners were to receive the funds, is there oversight of those funds to ensure that they're being used for these items listed below? Improving and doing, renovation and all of these things.
There would be a organization in place that would pass through all the funds and would act as I believe, a project oversight as far as the financial aspects and completing the projects.
And he was, okay, great. And the mention was that this oversight committee, so to speak, could be a local nonprofit from town. And I understand from being at previous meetings that one of the key players thus far has been Lompoc Community Housing Development Corporation. And I was curious if in this process, if we do approve the monies to be given to Mr. Sales, if there would be other organizations looked at for involvement.
Absolutely. There's no tie at this point to any organization, and it would be something that during his process he would look at several different organizations and structures, actually.
Wonderful. And my last question is sort of an aesthetic question. A lot of what complaints that I receive about downtown is that it is a very eclectic mishmash of different styles of buildings, and the concern of the public constituents that I've spoken to is that there's no consistency among these buildings. Part of it, is this up to council's decision or part of this process with Mr. Sales where they would decide how you would gain some sort of conformity among, the renovation of these buildings?
Actually, that's governed right now by the Old Town Specific Plan, which was adopted in the year 2000. And we actually had a downtown specialist come in and review the Old Town. And, of course, one of the primary areas of concern was the architectural theme or the lack thereof. And after an extensive tour, a series of workshops with the community, what the general consensus was and the recommendation by the consultant is Lompoc does not have a dominant architectural theme. That's why you described it exactly as the architect described it, was eclectic. And what they had recommended at the time, and I'll go on to tell you where we are with the specific plan, is that that eclectic theme should be preserved and an effort should be made to restore and preserve buildings as close to their original appearance as possible, and then tie together with some of the street furniture, the lamps, the paving, the other pedestrian-oriented features by sign programs that are compatible with each other, but to not try to go for a Western theme or a Spanish theme because that would really destroy the historical aspect of the Old Town. The specific plan is now almost 11 years old. We will be seeing a request in the budget for funds to update that, and that could include another look at architecture. But like I said, the experts have told us to try to recreate a place that didn't exist with an architectural theme that was never present isn't really true downtown restoration. It doesn't seem to work.
And I agree with you on that note, but I think that we've had 11 years of deterioration, and quite frankly, having some sort of conformity, I think personally, and what I've been hearing from my constituents, is going to be the best bet. So I'm wondering if these things could take place simultaneously, or if because I understand that this new market tax credit is very timely, whereas a downtown specific plan update could take quite a long time. So that would be my worry then, that there would sort of be a disconnect on that level. I mean, I appreciate that they have to follow a certain set of guidelines. I'm just afraid that those guidelines may not be, may not reflect, I guess, the current of where downtown is going. So I didn't know if there could be some.
The specific plan is more a regulatory tool. I think what it sounds like what you're looking for is a way to make some of this property improvement happen, but make sure that it goes in a manner where it's a cohesive downtown unit. Is that
exactly?
Okay. We can do that through a combination of land use and then through the new market tax credit or whatever funding we have.
Okay. Thank you.
We could do that update. So.
Thank you.
Councilmember Martner.
Thank you, Councilmember Lingle. I have a lot of questions. Unfortunately, Mr. Sells, I don't see him here, and that's a problem. The second problem is I understand that all of this idea was born out of the Chamber Community 2020 group. Do we have a representative from that group here? Are you an official representative? No. So we don't have an official representative from that. Okay, so I'm going to ask the questions to the staff. My first question is, Mr. Timothy Sales has a really impressive resume, and I would like to know if, did we check with any of his clients on the level of success that he has with all of these projects? I mean, he has done a lot of stuff, and I would like to get an impression of how successful he is.
I did have my staff today call several of his references, and I did receive, although they were 10 to 15 years old, the projects that we were able to check, he did receive several good reports of his accomplishments while he was employed with COSMOD and working with several other agencies and projects. But other than that, I had just brought this forward as at the request of council, so I was not really directed to analyze or do any other further study as to whether or not This is a...
But wait a minute, we're awarding tax dollars monies here, and we are actually awarding a contract to a consultant. I mean, isn't there some level of accountability and checking that the city does? Or do we just approve things or not approve things?
Again, I did have my staff call several references today, but perhaps Council Member Lingle can expand on that, because he was the requester of the proposal.
I can expand upon it a little bit. And unfortunately, I don't have my notes to tell you which ones, but I did talk to several of the people that Mr. Sales has worked with, and he has been very successful in several of his more recent projects as well, including obtaining new market tax credits. So, I mean, and unfortunately, I can't tell you which ones they are. I don't have the notes with me right now.
Okay, so we have some level of confidence that this gentleman gets the work done and succeeds at getting the work done. Okay. My next question is, according to your report, the Chamber of Commerce, and I don't know if there is an official representative of the Chamber of Commerce, did contact 62 property owners for this meeting that was carried out on January 19th, and 8 of those were present. So that's like about a 13% interest of all the potential people.
Yeah. If I could address that a little bit. Granted that only 8 showed up, the letters were sent out only a few days in advance, and also most of the property owners are out of town and many out of state. So,
but they could send a letter, an email saying, hey, this sounds good, this is great, we're interested. I mean, they don't need to physically be here. Or, I mean, the point that I want to get is how many people are we going to get interested in this project? We heard tonight from one property owner showing certain levels of concern regarding parking. And Mr. Sales said, well, that would be part of the feasibility study to make sure that those concerns are addressed. So I just want to get a feeling of, are we throwing $10,000 away, or are we going to get something out of $10,000? Because I really would like to get something out of $10,000.
And I appreciate your concern. I don't believe we're going to be throwing $10,000 away. If you in the report, it says that this is an initial study to give us information whether we should move forward with the project. We are not, by any means, moving forward the project with this study right now. What we're doing is we're awarding some money to a very experienced person to talk to the property owners. And granted, there were only 8, but at that meeting, Councilmember Cosper, you were at that meeting? Okay. Yeah. Anyway,
the initial Tim Sales.
Actually, I was quite impressed with the letter going out only like a day ahead of time or before that, and 8 people showing up. And there was quite a bit of enthusiasm from those property owners. We all know that, you mentioned, someone mentioned the progress of our downtown area. I've recently, actually during the Walmart debates, that I received an email from someone in the downtown area said that this issue has been going on since the 1960s, the development of our downtown area. We have an opportunity right now not to throw away $10,000, but to make a small investment to possibly receive as much as we're talking. I mean, it will be tens of millions of dollars of money coming into our downtown area that the property owners and the city do not have to front these tens of millions of dollars. Do we have any guarantee on the $10,000? Absolutely not. I mean, it could be $10,000 that in 6 months we say, well, that didn't work. But we've been working on this now for 60 years, our downtown area. It's about time that we look at if we have a possibility of getting $10 million. A $10,000 investment is, in my opinion, a very worthwhile investment. That's why I'm bringing this forward to hopefully the council will say, okay, there is a risk. Absolutely there's a risk on this. But is there a potential for a return on this investment? I think there's a huge potential there. Nothing has happened in our downtown area for so long. If it has the slightest opportunity of being successful, which I think is more than a slight opportunity, I think we should at least give it a chance for success. Without this investment, without this expertise, we certainly don't have the expertise in the city right now to do this. This gentleman, and as a matter of fact, he's been here 3 times on his own dime. Now I think it's about time that we start, if we want to use him, we start paying him for it. So there's quite a bit of interest in this.
Thank you, Councilmember Lingle, for your eager support of this. I would like to add one thing, and that is if we're going to award $10,000 for a contract, we need to, and this is one thing that bothers me very much about this report, and I really, I don't want to vote it down because of this. In fact, I do want to move on and approve this thing, but I will absolutely require that Mr. Sales provides a final written report. As it is stated in this report, he will only provide a simple memoranda with necessary displays and simple graphics. I think our city, our taxpayers, need a final report, whatever the final report may say. That is basically just a question of accountability and, adding on 20 years from now, we might have to go back and say, what was that report about? What were his studies? And not have it get lost in the jumble-bumble of hearsay and minutes and so forth. So I would put an absolute requirement that there is a final report that is generated after this $10,000 contract.
Ms. Costa.
Thank you, Councilmember Lingle. I'm going to agree with Councilmember Martiner 100% on that as well. I understand that the next step would be a much larger product, and there will be many written reports in that. However, if we decide that Mr. Sales is not the most effective consultant for us, I think that we need that as essentially background to make that decision. So I agree with that. My question for staff is, again, seeing this from my point of view and having clients on a consultant basis as well, payment plans can differ. Were we planning on giving the entire $10,000 up front, or is there any kind of, step process, if you could explain that?
We will be having city attorney write the contract, and I'm sure that it will be in phases payable as work is accomplished.
Thank you. Another reason why I think a final report is required as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Lingle. My other last comment would be, in the report, you state that there might be an additional $50,000. This decision that is being made tonight is only for the $10,000, and there is no string attached to the $50,000?
That's correct.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So, Councilmember Martiner, I appreciate your concern on that, and if you'd like to make a motion indicating that as a restriction or requirement.
I think we need to hear public comment.
I'm sorry, yes, okay. Public comment.
Members of the council, staff, I'm Alice Milligan, and I'm also a member of the 2020 committee for the chamber working on downtown. And I know we've addressed the situation downtown so many times, I've lost track of how many times. And there are so many people in this community, I would say probably 100%, who really want to see our downtown progress and develop into something that we can really be proud of. And I personally have worked in the past with Mr. Sales, and I can say that he comes with outstanding recommendations. I really would like to see us take this first step and approve a contract so we can get this thing going. We've had several meetings with the property owners downtown, and they've expressed a real enthusiasm and interest in becoming involved in this. And I see this as an opportunity to take some of the buildings that do not meet the seismic requirements and get them up to code. Because what's so scary about our downtown is that someday these buildings may come down if we don't do something about them, and it would just be a horrible situation for our downtown. So I really would like to see the council approve a contract with Mr. Sales for the initial step, and I feel very confident that he will do an excellent job, having worked with him before. And as a second item, because this does involve RDA money, I hope that the city staff is looking at the RDA monies that are available, and I'm sure all of us have been watching and reading the news in terms of our new governor who is looking at possibility of closing out RDA and hopefully not take our RDA money away. So I hope the council will instruct staff to allocate that money to existing projects so that we don't have to send it to Sacramento. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Carol Benham, Lompoc resident. I'm kind of repeating some things that have been said by some of you, but I'd like to go ahead and voice my support for some of the comments. I would also agree that if this contract is granted, there should be a final report of some type. There needs to be a summary. It can't just be a collection of materials that now becomes the property of the city. Within a week or 2 weeks, people will disagree about what he said, what he meant, or what he didn't say. So let's have a final report. I would also like to suggest that the contract for this consultant be very specific, that he's being asked to do a comprehensive look at the organizations that could serve as the CDEs, and that he not limit it to the one organization he mentioned at the meeting that was covered and printed in the Lompoc record. That he mentioned some other even out-of-town clearinghouses, and I think that's a great idea, so that Lompoc knows a full range of options, and it's not being pointed toward a single organization. And then I also agree with Councilmember Martner's suggestion that we be clear that the city putting up this $10,000 feasibility study, which I think is a great idea, that it be clear to everyone that doesn't mean the city's going to pay for the next $50,000 for step 2. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Benham.
Good evening, council members and Laurel. I'm Bob Manning. We have a business downtown. I'm also on the 2020 committee. And we've been working for, 3 years now in this whole project for downtown? To me, this just brings a focus to it that we have not had. And I'd like to see you approve this, get it moving. Let's get something done with our RDA money.
Thank you, Mr. Manning.
Honorable council members, my name is Nicholas Gonzalez. I come to you today as both a person who's participated in many of the 2020 meetings and also as a recently an acquirer of property within the Old Town Overlay District. I've stood up here, I think, many times before. We've expended millions. We've spent approximately 10+ million on the swimming pool. We're approaching 6-7 million on the senior committee. So when I really appreciate the prudence in your evaluation of the 10,000, but downtown needs the 10,000. I really would like to encourage you to take that step and to pay for that study. I'm in the finance business, and believe me, new market tax credits is about the best hope you have right now in this particular time of the market. So I would highly encourage you to consider it. I can appreciate the prudence in maybe having some requirements, but the downtown really does need the money. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. Anyone else would like to speak?
Good evening, Council. Joyce Howerton, Lompoc. I think this is a great idea. I think it's really needed. I think that it's a wonderful opportunity. I don't think the city should pay for it. I think $10,000, we earlier heard from the president of the board of the library talking about Charlotte's Web. There are projects throughout Lompoc that need money. There are commercial properties throughout Lompoc that need support. and they're not getting it. We've put an enormous amount of money into Old Town. And I agree with the property owners, something needs to be done, but this came out of a study through the chamber, the 2020 vision. The city pays the chamber quite a bit of money. I don't understand why the chamber's not putting the $10,000 up to hire this consultant who is only going to just do an initial project to see if it should move forward. To me, I mean, $10,000 is a lot of money for the city to spend right now for this, and I agree it should happen. I just don't think we should pay for it. I'm glad to hear that the consultant's good, because it made me nervous when he was doing his presentation that twice and maybe 3 times he talked about free money. And if he thinks there's free money out there, I mean, that really makes me nervous, because there is no such thing as free money. And I think we need to take it very serious. So I would also say that if you go ahead, and it sounds like you will, that if a group is picked to sort of oversee this, certainly you would want a group who has to oversee compliance to be a group that's always in compliance. And I think that is a really important point. But I would take this back to the chamber and ask them to put the $10,000 up, because it's a great idea and it needs to be done. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Overton. Anyone else have anything to say? Okay, then I'll bring it back to the council. Further discussion? Oh, Ms. Costa. Yes.
Thank you, Councilmember Lingle. That was also, thank you, Ms. Howerton, for making your statement. That was also my concern, and that's why I previously asked the question about the organization. And I do believe, if possible, we, as the city, and possibly investors of upwards of $50,000 to $60,000, if we decide to go forward with the application, have some role in the oversight as well to ensure that monies coming in are being used prudently. So that said, I wanted to make it clear to the public that although I don't believe that this is an end-all be-all for downtown by any means, but the hope is that this really can truly act as a catalyst, and it's something that we've needed for so long now. So I will be voting in favor.
Okay.
Thank you.
Would someone like to make a motion? Well, okay, I'm going to make, excuse me, I will move that we accept staff recommendations, that they, approve and authorize the executive director and her designee to execute all documents necessary to enter into the contract not to exceed $10,000, to perform an initial analysis in accordance with this report, and direct general counsel to prepare an appropriate agreement. I'd like to also state in there that we'd like to see this as a final document. Is that what you'd like to see? Final report. That's my motion.
I would like to second that with the statement that we were given the time frame to be completed in 4 to 6 weeks. If for some reason it goes beyond that, I would definitely like a report, an update at that time as to where Mr. Sales is in the process.
That's fine.
I will be approving and voting for the motion. I'd like to make a couple of comments, and the comments are, we've heard so much about downtown revitalization, and we're all quite tired of not seeing anything happen, and I haven't been in this town long. I can't imagine how other people feel. One of the issues, though, it has been that it's been more or less the same players that keep trying to make this happen, and I sure hope that Mr. Sales will be new blood that will make something happen in downtown.
Thank you, Ms. Martin. Any further discussion? I'd like to call for a vote then. And that passes 3-0 with 2 abstentions. Thank you. And we'll call back the mayor and Councilmember Starbuck.
Okay, the next thing will be item 17, which will be the award of project number FY07W1, construction, testing, and equipment of the municipal water well number 11 and the installation of a 16-inch pipe transmission line. And we have Michael Luther from our senior civil engineer.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor, council members. City project number FY07W1 consists of site work including grading, trenching, asphalt paving, building foundations, electrical service installation, construction and testing of a municipal water well, and the installation of approximately 7,500 linear feet of 16-inch transmission water main. In September, the Public Works Department, Engineering Division, took over the project management from the Utilities Department, Water Division, and advertised the project for bids on November 3rd. The city clerk received 12 bids on December 8th, which ranged in price from $1,749,443 to $2,570,733, which were very competitive, 12 bids, 10 of which were under the engineer's estimate of $2 to $2.25 million. The engineering division will provide the construction management for the project and inspection services, but the engineering staff does not have the expertise to oversee the installation of a municipal water well. Therefore, we have asked the design engineer to provide a consultant service proposal for those services. He's estimated a not-to-exceed fee of $45,000, which will include various items, including testing, observation, survey, SCADA and telemetry, startup and testing, and various utility coordinations. The fiscal impact for the project is the project budget is staff is proposing is $2,186,943, which includes the construction contract, $170,000 for contingency allowance, approximately $80,000 for engineering division staff time, $45,000 for consultant services, $110,000 for the electrical service connection fees, $17,500 for biological monitoring, and $15,000 for quality control material testing. If you have additional financial questions, Mr. Brad Wilkie is here, and he can answer those as far as the funding sources. So at this time, I would like to turn it over to council to address the staff recommendations.
Councilmember Costa.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Wilkie, can you please come up and discuss the funding options?
In the preparation of the staff report, I was asked to do a analysis of the fiscal impact. What I did in that fiscal analysis was to look at the historical funding source. The primary funding source for this was the 2005 water and wastewater bond. That provided approximately $1.3 million of the money needed to do the project. In the bond documents, it talked about that it would be a primary but not total funding source for the project, which means that the rest of the money would have to be paid for from ongoing operational revenues. The current status of the water department balance sheet has adequate cash to meet the needs of the non-bond component of the funding. There is no real amount that we need to keep in as reserves for the water department. We don't have a policy on the reserves to be kept. We do, however, have bond covenants that require us to keep a certain amount of what they call net revenues available for bond payments. As of July 1st, June 30th of 2010, we met those bond covenants for both the 2005, 2007, and 1998 bond issues. So at that point in time, the net revenue numbers that we had were quite in excess of the minimums that were required under those covenants. The amount of money that's available between the reserve money that was from the bond and the operational money that's in the fund is in excess of what the entire project estimate is of the $2.186 million. If you have it, that shows that there's adequate funds in the water department to do this project. Not really speaking to the point that the amount of the bid is significantly under the engineer's estimate. That is an offsetting. That's a good thing. So one of the things we can consider is taking advantage of that low bid environment and be able to utilize our resources to do this project.
Okay, so my main question then would be, I understand that we have sufficient cash, but how much would be remaining in these accounts if we use this available cash?
Well, on the bottom of the third page, I show that at the point in time at November 30th, we had about $2.2 million of cash between three available sources. There is other cash in the funds between the water and wastewater fund, but that is in excess of the $2.186 million available estimated for the project.
So we look at project by project basis, and so what you're saying, right? So we have available 2.2 when it's only 2.1 or
yeah. And one other thing that we were looking at is because of the closeness of those two projects is to looking at the future capital projects that are planned and how far they might be able to be pushed out so we can recover the operational cash over time as we collect monies from customers for usage of the system.
And how is that looking? Like, how far would you have to then push back other capital projects?
The main thing that we'd have to do is to make sure that we meet the covenants for the bond issues by June 30th, 2011. And the calculation I did for June of 2010, we need a ratio of 1 or 1.25 depending on the numbers. We have at June 10 about a 3 ratio. There is also a bond rate reserve fund that is housed in the wastewater fund, but because all the bond issues that we've done, 98, 05, and 07 are combination water wastewater, that $1.9 million reserve is available for both water and wastewater to meet those ongoing debt service ratio requirements. So.
Thank you.
So just to make sure I understand, we have more than enough to meet the future reserve needs with all the various funds?
Well, like I said, it's not really our reserve ratios, it's the bond issues.
Yes.
And the bonds require us to have either a 1.0 or 1.25 ratio of net revenues to our debt service obligations. And one thing that will help keep us at that point is, to some extent, the deferral of any other additional capital projects until we get a sufficient amount above that to do another project. So.
And I guess this would be a question for Mr. Stassi. We don't have any other capital projects with regard to the water department that are anywhere in the near term, do we? In the near term or the future?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, and members of the public, we do have capital projects nowhere near this amount. For instance, we have ongoing capital projects where we spend about $170,000 a year with main replacements, et cetera. But with this current economic situation, I've cut back on the capital projects in all 4 of our divisions. And when we have the meeting on the 10th, I'll be able to review that in more detail.
You don't view this as any problem with regard to the future for your other capital projects, though?
I do not view this as a problem. We don't have any other large capital projects in the 5-year CIP.
Okay, and one last question. There's an electrical service connection fees. Is that us paying ourselves?
I'm going to state it's the water fund paying the electric fund. So, yes, it's internal. Where water gets hurt, electric benefits.
And these would be the reasonable and customary fees for a similar project done by a private party?
Yes, the fee structure is the same whether it's a city project or a private party project.
I guess my last question would be, do we have any concern about the quality of the successful bidder?
No, we have no reason to believe he's not responsible. He has the bid bonds, the contractor's license, and the insurance. Well, he has to provide the insurance with the contract, but he appears to have the ability to do that.
I guess my notice that he came from Nevada, which gave me some level of concern.
Then, yeah.
Is he a Nevada corporation or a California corporation, do you know?
His contractor's license listed him as Lake Tahoe.
In California?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Any other council members have a question before we open it for public comment? Okay, and now we'd open this for public comment, and it's your opportunity to ask questions on this subject. Okay, seeing no one rise, we'll come back to the council for further discussion. Who else has a question prior to making a motion? Councilmember?
No question, just a comment. Mr. Mayor, you're concerned about the lowest bidder. It's a legitimate concern. I mean, being from out of state and everything. I noticed on the list there's a bidder from Lompoc here, and unfortunately that bidder was outbid or bid high by approximately 10%, $150,000, which would have been nice for a local bidder to get it. However, the bidder from Nevada is going to bring people in, hopefully, stay in our hotels, eat our food, as opposed to probably the person here in Lompoc lives here. So possibly there's some good things that happen with that as well.
Councilmember Martiner?
You know, I do have to comment on this whole thing about people coming and staying in Lompoc. And you know how many, again, you know, we throw this out all the time, but, and I know that we cannot change the law, but I would really much rather prefer to pay an additional 10% and keep the money local, because I think that 10% will never be made up by the little tax dollar that we get out of the hamburger place or whatever it is. So anyway, but the law does not allow us to do that, so I'm not taking the breadcrumbs.
On another note, at some point we'll be bringing back a local labor ordinance that might help us with this, that we've acquired from Allen Hancock College, that might be some assistance and appears to be legal. Are there any other comments with regard to this, or would someone care to make a motion? Councilmember Lingle?
I move that we accept staff recommendations.
And
I second.
Okay. And Councilmember Lingle, could you specify something, project number in your motion, please?
It's in the staff recommendations, but it's project FY07W1.
And is that acceptable to the second? Thank you. Is there any further discussion from the council? Seeing none, could we vote, please? And that passes 5-0. Thank you. Okay. Item number 18, the award of a professional audit services contract for the annual financial auditing services for the City of Lompoc and the Lompoc Redevelopment Agency, which was, strangely enough, a topic of conversation at our recent seminar in Sacramento. Brad Wilkie, our Management Services Director.
Mayor, council members, this was a fairly long time in coming. To give you a little bit of background, the current auditor that we've had since 2004, and we've gone through 2 successive audit cycles with that firm. Last year, with the transitions that happened in the finance department, we had a 1-year extension that brought us to this point. Typically, cities and counties would go out for a 3-year contract with 1 or 2 years of extensions. And those are usually done, almost exclusively done, with open bidding. A bid package is distributed to all interested parties as widely as we can do. In this particular case, we did it through the California Municipal Finance Officers Association's website, along with our website, and individual firms that solicited information from us, we added them to the list too. So we submitted this application package, the bid package, to 29 firms, and we received 6 proposals back. 2 reasons for why we're here today is, the first one is, in the past it appeared that these bids were done through the normal bidding process, but didn't come to council. And one of the reasons why I wanted to bring it to council was because it's a fairly new council. We've had the same audit firm for 7 years, which is a fairly long time, and to give an opportunity for council to weigh in on whether we should switch to another auditor, or if because of the way the proposals came in, to stay with the current auditor. All 6 bidders are compliant. They are able to do this type of work. I had a call this afternoon from one of them asking where they placed on the list, and it was really hard for the committee that looked at this to differentiate top to bottom with not a very large differential. So, and in some respects, if we pick any one of the 6, we would get a quality product and have the ability to get the audit work done in a timely manner. Having said that, we did select 2 choices to make recommendations for. One based on price, which is the current auditor, which kind of makes sense because a lot of the work that other auditors would have to do, they've already done that 7 years ago, and they don't have to go through that again, except for just refreshing to make sure that the same internal controls are still being done. The other option that I'm recommending, and it's basically 2 recommendations, is if we would like to go with a new firm, our recommendation is the Glenn Burdett out of San Luis Obispo. All of the prices are a fair amount more than they were over the last 4 years, and that just, I think, is because the original price of the contract we have with the current auditor is from 7 years ago, and in that time frame, costs have gone up, and this is the first opportunity we've had with a new set of proposals. So having gone through that background, my proposal is to solicit whether the council would like to go with the lowest bidder, which is Moss Levy, or go with the recommendation of the committee that looked at their reports, which is Glenn Burdett. And if either one of those 2 are acceptable, ask for an award of contract to one or the other of those firms. Alan Eschenbach is here from Glenn Burdett. If there's any questions, I invited Moss Levy to the meeting as well, and they politely declined. But if you have any questions, I'm here to answer. And if you have any questions for Mr. Eschenbach, he's available for questions too.
Councilmember Starbuck.
Yeah, Mr. Wilkie, just real quick, I'm looking here on page 4 where it lists hours. What are these hours for? Is this what they anticipate it takes them to do an audit?
Correct. Yeah. Part of the proposal requested them to tell us what they thought it would take their overall firm the number of hours to do the work, and that's kind of gives an indication of how much effort they think they need to do to perform the audit and prepare the work papers and get to the point where we can issue the financial statements or a CAFR if we decide to do a CAFR.
So Brown Armstrong, they really think we're in terrible shape as compared to Glenn Burdett then?
I think it all depends on their philosophy on how they look at certain things. The number of hours does not necessarily equate to how much time they think we are going to take them to do the work. It's just a matter of how much they decide to put in.
It almost appears that the hours relates directly to the dollars. That's why I was kind of questioning.
To some extent they do, because if this was not a bid process, we would see these dollar amounts in cost per partner or cost per manager, that kind of thing. So to some extent it does, yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the council at this time? Councilmember Lingle?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Since a representative from Glenn Burdett is here, maybe he could step forward and try to convince us why we should pay $45,000 additional.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, thank you for giving me the opportunity to address that question. A couple things come to mind. I think there are a couple of things for you to think about as put in the proposal before you, which is whether you think a fresh set of eyes is important. There is a prevailing wisdom within the industry to rotate every so often. The frequency of that rotation remains subject to debate among various members of the profession. But I do think our firm's philosophy is that we view the audit as more than a commodity. We view it as more than something where it's a checklist item to be performed, checked off, move on. Our reputation and our references, and I assume it's a factor that the selection committee included in their determination of identifying us as the number one choice, is we're present at presenting our financial statements each year. We typically have a presentation. We discuss findings and the conclusions of the audit. We're available for questions, because that's really the key thing I think that you're getting out of it is what can we improve on it. And we rarely conduct an audit where we don't have qualitative recommendations for improvements within the accounting department. But our goal is not to be our goal with those comments is constructive, and I think our relationships that we've built with the various audit clients that we've had show that the staff is very receptive to that, because our goal is to come in and provide you not just a historical financial statement that gives you some comfort on stuff that happened in the past when you're already looking forward, but it's to identify issues with the controls, the operational processes, and things that can be improved so that the bar is raised internally and that the entity would somehow benefit from that, either in the qualitative information that you're getting on an ongoing basis to make decisions, or just in the decision processes that are going on behind the scenes. So I think that's the general reputation that our firm has, and that we bring that we attempt to bring to the process.
Thank you. Is auditing a public agency such as the City of Lompoc different? Is the process different than auditing another corporation someplace, a private corporation?
It's very different.
Very different, okay.
Very different. Good.
So what experience do you have with other public agencies? What other public agencies are you auditor for?
We're basically the largest audit firm in the Central Coast area, and we basically have two seasons. We have what we call a for-profit season, when we're auditing predominantly small, locally owned businesses, and that's really probably 3-4 months of the year, maybe 5 months. But really, the lion's share of the year, we're dealing with governmental agencies. We do a number of school districts, community colleges. You mentioned Allen Hancock a few minutes ago. We work with them. Santa Barbara, we were auditors for over a decade for Lompoc Unified School District and had a great relationship with the staff there. We do a number of cities, Guadalupe, San Luis Obispo, Atascadero. So we do a whole bunch of special service districts as well.
Thank you. Councilmember Costa.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I actually have a question for staff. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Have we ever done a formal evaluation of our current auditor?
I have not. There was a process much similar to this that was done in 2004 and probably to some extent the same in 2007 that was done when that audit firm came aboard. And in 2007, before my time, I'm sure there was some consideration of if there was any kind of issues with the current auditor. We had the same opportunity then as we do now with a full-blown proposal going out to various bidders to make that choice, and there was a overt choice to stay with that auditor. So I would presume that that meant that there was a comfort level with having that auditor continue on with a second round of a cycle without having an interruption, a switch between auditors.
Wonderful, thank you. And my second question is actually, I'm trying to get your personal opinion, if that's okay, on if there's something to be said about bringing fresh eyes onto these documents and understanding that, you know, there is an allegiance to this auditing firm that has done a great job for us so far, but that there may be something to be said for having new eyes on the same documents.
I spent a couple of years doing what he does, not at his level, but there are many different attitudes with the various governmental entities that we audited. There were some that just switched every 3 years no matter what. And there was one that had two firms. They would go with this firm for 3 years. They go with this firm the next 3 years. They go back to the first firm again, and they just kept that cycle for many, many, many years. Having just said that I wasn't here in 2007, one thing that I think would be beneficial both to me as being here for 2 years and you, 2 years or less, to get a fresh look at how the financials come together, to see if there's anything that's happened over the last 7 years, that if there's things that have changed, that maybe we have a ability to improve things because of just doing the same thing over 7 years. I have had no issues whatsoever with the current auditor. We have a good relationship. He's got the primary manager on their audit has got my name, so it's kind of hard. Hi, Brad. But it's a good relationship. But there is a lot to be said for my position, having just come on board, to have somebody new to say, if there are any issues that are lagging out there or underneath somewhere, I'd like to know about them, and if there's not, then I'd like to know that too, because it gives a really good demarcation for me as the finance director compared to what has happened before. And it just would, I don't expect anything to come out of the woodwork, but if this provides an avenue to improve what we're doing and to a clean slate for everybody, I think that's a good thing.
So then the second question would be, do you think that the positive aspect of that then justifies the additional cost? I know that that's up to us to make that decision, and I understand that, but I was looking for your professional opinion.
Well, on a grand scheme, this package is a little bit bigger than the one we just did for a $2 million project. Granted, we don't do a well every single year, but for a $45,000 audit for a city that has arguably a $180 million operation is a fairly small amount. And it's spread over all of our various entities. It's spread across all the utilities, general fund. So on that kind of look at it, a jump from roughly $35,000 to $45,000 it's a $10,000 jump, and earlier we were talking about $10,000 of money being spent out of the RDA, but for looking at an audit of an entity that's a $180 million entity, I think we'll get our money well served from any of the six. So that jump to 40, 45 is a jump, but to some extent that jump is caused by having the same auditor for 7 years. The firm that proposed a $63,000 average, we didn't think that kind of a jump was really warranted for what we do. So to some extent, $5,000 a year is quote, okay, but the one between 45 and 63 seemed to be a little excessive for what the firms are offering.
And that was the Brown Armstrong?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Councilmember Martiner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to make a general comment regarding a new Fresh of Eyes. And I'm looking forward to the budget workshops because you're a new a new set of fresh eyes. I don't know how to say it, whatever. But you're basically, this is your first time going through the budget cycle, and besides the auditing thing. But you should probably have you have seen all of these numbers with different eyes than what they have been seen before.
It's an eye-opening experience, so it's...
I'm sure it is.
So we can get our money's worth from our League of Cities. And Councilmember Costa just went back and looked in there, and the average recommended period for switching auditors was 6 years from our League of Cities workshop, and that was one of the things that struck me when we were there, because somewhere we had this conversation previously. Are there any other questions from the council before we open this up for public discussion? Okay, seeing none, who in the audience would like to join us for public comment on this item? And seeing no one rise from the 30 of you that are still sitting in the back row, all right, I'll tell the truth. The 5 people and one small child who is very enthusiastic, we'll bring it back to the council. I guess I'll take my shot at it. I would like to change just because of what I learned at the League of Cities and some things that Brad said and commented on. I think it's time to make the change. Yeah, I know it's a little more money, but spread across the wide scope of the city, it's probably not a big impact. And I agree with Councilmember Martiner. It's nice to have a fresh look. I think you get good value out of it. And if there's anyone who would like to comment before making a motion, that would be fine. Councilmember?
Yeah, I think I would agree with so far with that. Yeah, I'm going to stay with what the selection committee's agreed with also.
Anyone else have a comment? Would someone care to make a motion? Councilmember Costa.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move that we direct staff to enter into a contract with the highest ranked proposer, Glenn, Burdett, Phillips, and Bryson CPAs for a total contract amount not to exceed $228,975 for up to 5 years, and authorize the Management Services Director to execute the contract and to execute other such documents necessary to complete the audits on an annual basis.
Okay, and I would accept a second.
I'll second.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion from the council on this? Seeing none, could we vote, please? And that passes 5-0. Thank you both for staying with us until this rather late hour.